There's a lot of things about me you don't know anything about, Dottie. Things you wouldn't understand. Things you couldn't understand. Things you shouldn't understand.
I don't understand.
You don't want to get mixed up with a guy like me. I'm a loner, Dottie. A rebel. So long, Dot.
Bye.
Greetings, friends. Welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the movie review podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide. Highbrow is the Zeppelin, and lowbrow is the thing it crashed into.
I like to think that Ethan Hunt just sort of flew away from that explosion. Like, you know, like in movies where, like, the concussive force of an explosion just sort of knocks you elegantly away.
Yeah, it never, like, reduces you to carbon. It just sort of flings you bodily through the air.
Doesn't cause massive internal trauma. It's just like you hit the ground running and you're fine, you know?
And you can run down a hallway away from an explosion.
Yeah, just kind of put a Coke machine between you and the explosion and you're set.
I'm telling you that the world will be a better place when somebody can invent, like, a slow-moving, like bomb that they can use on movie sets.
Well, they did that in, there was an episode of Invader Zim about a very slow explosion. That was just kind of expanding really slowly, and Zim had to keep moving it around. My name is William Bibbiani. I'm a film critic for CriticallyAcclaimed.net and The Wrap and IGN. Everybody calls me Bibbs.
My name is Witney Seibold. I'm the other guy, and I write for all of those places as well. Well, not for The Wrap.
Not at the moment.
If the editor will have me.
Someday.
Then I will happily contribute.
This week on Critically Acclaimed, we have new reviews of Mission Impossible Fallout and a new drama called Puzzle, and we're doing something a little different. At the end of every month, the last episode of every month, we usually review an entire movie franchise as selected by our listeners on the Schmoville Facebook page. We've had a lot of requests from people like, hey, could you do like every movie direct from a certain director? And we're like, yeah, okay, if you want. So
sure, whatevs.
Yeah, we're easy. So we put up a poll at the beginning of this month to you help us pick a director and we'll guide you through their entire filmography.
And to be fair, we selected directors that you and I are already kind of familiar with.
Well, we wanted to do like a good long one. Like a good, like we didn't just want to do like...
not so long like Hitchcock, who directed like 150 movies.
Well, and we couldn't get into his silent era stuff anyway. Like a lot of his stuff is gone, but like... no, we wanted to do like a director who like had a good, long, prolific career and really get into the meat of it. So the Coen brothers was on there. I think we put Kubrick on there, who's had like a shorter career, but had like a really in-depth career. And we had Tim Burton, which is, of course, the director people chose because people mostly like Tim Burton, at least as overall.
I think a lot of people go to see Tim Burton movies kind of by default.
Yeah.
And,
he's an institution.
He's an institution, and yet he still is unique. There have been some vague imitators, but nobody's really come close to what he does. So I guess we'll get into that when we discuss his filmography. He has directed 18 feature films, 19 if you include Dumbo, which is not yet released.
And he was a driving force behind another feature film directed by Henry Selick, The Nightmare Before Christmas. So we're going to talk about that one as well, even though he didn't technically direct that one.
He wrote the poem it's based on, and he produced and designed it, even though he was
really hands-on.
Yeah.
But that's a little later in the program. For right now, we're going to do some new movie reviews, and the movie everybody is talking about this week is Puzzle. Now, Puzzle...
Tell me about Puzzle. I'm actually curious about Puzzle. Tell me about Puzzle.
is a new drama directed by Mark Turteltaub, and it stars Kelly MacDonald, an actor I'm really a big fan of. I've been a fan of hers.
Mark Turteltaub or...
Yeah. Not John.
Not John Turteltaub.
Not John.
Okay.
Actually, I don't know if they're related. I should look that up.
How many Turteltaubs could there be?
There must be some.
The world is just lousy with Turteltaubs. There's 8 in this building.
It stars Kelly MacDonald, an actor I've been a fan of since she co-starred in Trainspotting. You probably remember her from No Country for Old Men. She's great, and here she has a lead role as a suburban housewife who takes care of her husband, who's a mechanic, and her 2 teenage sons. And we meet her at the beginning of the movie, and she's preparing for a birthday party, and it's the afternoon, the sunlight is streaming out the windows, Janusz Kaminski style, so everything seems a little depressing. And she's just sort of going about the motions, putting up the stuff, putting up the balloons. And then we get to the part and we find out it's her birthday party. And her husband and her sons didn't do a damn thing. And she's working the entire party just to make sure that they're happy. And so she's not miserable, but she's not happy either. She's really stifled. And one of her birthday presents she gets is a jigsaw puzzle. Like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. It's the kind of gift that's like, it's nice, but it's not very thoughtful. So normally you just sort of put that away, maybe break it out on a rainy Sunday or whatever. She has nothing else to do. So she whips out the puzzle, and it turns out she's preternaturally good at it.
Okay.
Like, she assembles it over the course of a couple of hours.
Nice.
That's normally a multi-day project, a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. So she goes to a jigsaw puzzle store to get more jigsaw puzzles. She's really, really good at it, and she ends up teaming up.
It's going to be like a dark Polanski-ish kind of obsession into her own mind sort of thing.
There's a couple of different ways this could have gone, and it kind of finds interesting middle ground. Stop catfighting.
I'm sorry.
Bad cats. Bad cats. We have cats, and one of them is young and rambunctious, so they fight sometimes.
Yeah. So, yeah, when you hear cats fighting, there's just cats fighting in the room, and there's nothing we can really do other than hurl coffee mugs.
Don't hurl coffee mugs.
Oh, all right.
Styrofoam cups at most. No, we're not doing that. But anyway, so she ends up, responding to an ad from a puzzle champion. Like, they're in national puzzle championships.
Okay.
And she responds to an ad from Irfan Khan.
Okay.
Great actor from Life of Pi, Slumdog Millionaire, he's in Jurassic World. Like, he's...
That's right, he is in Jurassic World.
Yeah, it's weird, right? He's a puzzle champion, and he's looking for a partner for the team tournament that's coming up. And she comes over, they have nothing in common, but they assemble a puzzle together, and then Irfan Khan, just hits a stopwatch and says, "Fuck me." Holy crap, she's fast.
Okay.
And then what happens is, over time, she starts kind of lying to her family about, her pastimes, where she's going in the middle of the day. And there's... Just
because she's embarrassed that this is...
She's embarrassed
about her hobby.
Or just she thinks that they won't understand. And indeed, as she starts easing them into... first she tells them that she's doing the singles tournament. She doesn't tell them about the teams.
Okay.
They're sort of vaguely supportive, and her husband thinks she's asking for permission, and she's like, no. I'm not. I'm just doing it. And she starts, now that she's got something she's really good at, that boosts her confidence, and she starts asserting herself more. And that really changes her life around.
I honestly thought this was a much darker film. Like she was going to start assembling puzzles made out of human corpses and that sort of thing.
No, it's not anything like that. But
Blumhouse's puzzle.
But this isn't super sweet shall we dance territory where it just reminds everyone about how nice their family is either. It actually drives her into a sense of real doubt about maybe she should have stayed in college. Maybe she was really good at math. Maybe, her marriage really is stifling her. Maybe Irfan Khan is. Who knows? And ultimately, that's not much of a plot. It's an almost fiendishly simple plot. There's almost nothing happening in a lot of it. To the extent where every time they try to add something that feels like a plot point, it feels kind of false. There's a bit where, after she gets the puzzle, she's good at the puzzle, but she needs more puzzles. Instead of going to a store to get more puzzles, she calls the person who gave her the puzzle and asks where they got the puzzle. And I'm like... It's a puzzle.
There's a company name printed on the box.
Yeah, you can.
There's an Upsy symbol. You can figure that out.
Well, you can just go to a store. They have puzzles at Target, for God's sake. Now, they needed her to go to this particular puzzle store because it's a specialty puzzle store, so you can answer that ad. But it really just, it's so simple and it's so understated that every time they try to tack any artificiality onto it, any heightened melodrama, it feels a little phony. But at the center of it all is this really astounding performance by Kelly Macdonald.
Yeah.
She's a really brilliant actor, and she hardly ever gets a great role. She hardly ever gets a starring role.
That's for sure.
I mean, she was in Finding Neverland as the person who played Peter Pan briefly. Like, it's a tragedy. Like, she should have been so much more. So, it's really great to see her get a showcase, and she knows what to do with this role. Like, she knows how to play it at the beginning, she knows how to play it in the middle, she knows how to play it at the end. She plays the entire transition completely believably and sells this huge evolution this woman makes over very little things. Just so organically that you just believe the character from beginning to end. And that in and of itself is completely astounding. The movie itself is perhaps slight to a fault, but there is also something really zen about like this sort of hobbyist subgenre where like people turn their lives around by like getting a hobby.
Getting into curling or something.
Yeah, like we talked about one of them a couple of months ago when we reviewed the original, or the Japanese movie Shall We Dance, which is about a stifled businessman.
Boring salaryman who learns how to dance ballroom and...
Yeah, and it's just this little thing.
Comes about enlightenment.
It just makes his day a little better. And this is something that I myself actually really connect with. I've talked about this before, I turned my hobby was movies. I turned that into a career. Which sounds great until you realize that you don't have a hobby anymore.
Right.
And so everything you do for fun is kind of intrinsically linked to work, and now in order to de-stress, what are you going to do? And personally, like of late, over like the last year or so, I've discovered that the movie trivia schmodown has become kind of my hobby.
Okay.
Like I get to like, delve into it, practice, rehearse, plan entrances, get into the theatricality of it, pester Christian Harloff at all hours of the day, like literally all hours, he will tell you. At just like 2 a.m. I had this great idea. Shut the fuck up, William. It's great. That's my hobby now, and it's actually like given me like a little bit more spring in my step, just because I have somewhere for my spare energy to go. What's your hobby? You gotta have a hobby, right?
Spare energy? I have a toddler.
So
you think I have spare energy? That's funny. You're so funny.
But you do have hobbies, though, right?
I don't know, strangling animals, golf, and masturbating.
You were collecting player piano rolls for a while.
Until we ran out of space. Yes.
Yeah. Witney has a player piano, like in Westworld.
I inherited a player piano, and yes, I was collecting player piano rolls. There is still one company that still makes player piano rolls of new music. You can get like a Britney Spears player piano roll, and I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
We have like the Monkees, but the usual like show tunes and ragtime stuff that you can find on player pianos. I collect strange music. That's sort of a hobby of mine. Mostly it's just collecting and amassing. I love going to record stores.
Well, I talked to Guillermo del Toro once, and Guillermo del Toro has like a hobby house.
Well, I mean, he's a wealthy, famous man. He can afford to have big hobbies and buildings full of his hobbies.
His hobby is basically making himself like the ultimate haunted house. Like there's a house he owns where like it rains in one room. Like it's absolutely insane, and he has all these incredible pieces of art. In fact, they had like a museum installation that was just the art that he had amassed and stuff from his movies and stuff from his collection. And what he had said was, I don't know if he said this to me or someone else, but like, you don't collect things just for you. You collect things so other people who collect things can come into your house and go, ooh.
So it's about being envied.
Yeah, my people like John Roca came in here and he talked on the podcast that he did about like my big DVD collection. That's why I have it, so that people come in and go, ooh. Yeah, and then the cats goes, meow.
You collect grumpy cats is what's going on there.
Sorry, buddy. I know it's stressful. I have an old cat and a young cat, and they have issues. So anyway, Puzzle. It's a sweet movie. If that sounds like it might connect to you on an emotional level, I think it will. It's a remake. I haven't seen the original, but this one pretty much works, and it works because Kelly MacDonald and to a different extent Irfan Khan, he's just not in it as much. Really phenomenal performance work.
Well, I mean, Irfan Khan is terrific.
He is terrific, yeah. But let's talk about the smaller release this week. Let's talk about Mission Impossible Fallout.
This is the 5th or maybe 6th film in this little-known series.
It's the 6th, if you don't count Mission Impossible versus the Mob from 1968. which was a theatrical release.
Nobody does.
But technically it was a theatrical release. If you want to get technical, if you want to like wow someone with
Jeremy Renner offshoot just called Ethan, that people don't really talk about that one anymore because that wasn't in continuity.
I would have loved to have seen that.
Jeremy Renner is Ethan Hunt.
Yeah.
Ethan. This is the sixth one. It's the second written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie.
Yeah, Christopher McQuarrie also had like a big, I don't think he got credit, but he did a major rewrite on Ghost Protocol as well.
But which was directed by Brad Burton.
He's been a major creative force in the series for at least the last 3 movies.
Yeah. The last one, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, remains the best.
I agree.
It's the best in the series. It is one of the best action films of the decade, I think.
I think that's fair.
It came out the same year as Mad Max Fury Road. I think it's at least as good. And they're very similar.
They are very similar because they're both,
They're both sort of late installments in a long-running series where the lead male character doesn't really have much to contribute to the story any longer. So it switches focus to a much more interesting female lead.
Yeah.
In Mad Max Fury Road, it was Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, and in this one it was Ilsa Faust, played by Rebecca Ferguson.
And she's phenomenal.
Yeah, she's really great, and Ilsa Faust is a really fascinating character, and one of the biggest disappointments of Mission Impossible Fallout is that she does the same thing.
Yeah.
They brought back Ilsa Faust, and good for them because she's great.
It should have been her movie, if you ask me.
It should have just been Ilsa Faust, and Ethan Hunt's not even in it.
Well, because
you can have a Mission Impossible film without Ethan Hunt. His story ended 2 films ago.
In fact, when I interviewed Christopher McQuarrie for Rogue Nation, we talked about how Ethan Hunt's story was over.
Yeah.
Like, as a personal character. Like, Ethan Hunt... Luca, knock it off.
Keep on talking. Ethan Hunt.
Okay, so the Mission Impossible story, it started with Ethan Hunt as a younger, more idealistic spy who gets betrayed not just by his mentor, but by the U.S. government, and he goes rogue, and that's a big story. And I really like the original Mission Impossible a lot. I think it's a good movie.
It's kind of an antiseptic film. It has a lot of really great... set pieces. I like that the set pieces are, for the most part, quiet.
Yeah.
Until you get to the helicopter and the channel sequence, which is pretty ridiculous.
It's pretty ridiculous, but you've earned it because you've only done the one big one. You've only done one huge action sequence, and you earned the right to do one.
And Mission Impossible was the TV series that this movie series is based on, was typically about a team. It was about a bunch of people working together, and it was kind of upsetting in the first one that they just murder the whole team like right away.
And they made a character who was quite beloved to fans of the series into the bad guy in that one, which a lot of people were really mad about. The second Mission Impossible movie was directed by Luca. Will you knock it off?
Yeah, it was directed by John Woo.
John Woo,
not by Luca.
John Woo brought a certain visual dynamism to it, but it's not a very good film. It's basically an awkward remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious with Tandy Newton in the Ingrid Bergman role.
It's bloody ridiculous. Here's what you need to know about Mission Impossible 2. The climax of the movie features a scene where Tom Cruise and the bad guy is played by Doug Ray Scott, if I recall.
Doug Ray Scott. Who was supposed to be Wolverine, but Mission Impossible 2 took so long to film that they had to find Hugh Jackman at the last minute. Mm-hmm. Hollywood history would have been very different if John Woo had been on time.
So there's a scene where they have like matching Supra souped up Kawasaki motorcycles, and they're charging at one another. I think on the lip of a canyon or something. They're outdoors, the lip of a canyon. They're charging their motorcycles, and somehow simultaneously they slam on the brakes and kick themselves bodily off of the motorcycles so they can fly at one another whilst firing guns.
There's a way better motorcycle duel. Like, I know John Woo thought he was like... John Woo just like comes up with a big action sequence and wants to do it, and I don't blame him. There's a way better version of that in the movie Torque. Have you ever seen Torque?
You know what? I haven't. I've seen Peter Tork of the Monkees.
Torque, Torque, was a Fast and Furious knockoff that came out around the time Fast and Furious 2 was around. And a lot of people wrote it off completely because it was overbearingly ridiculous. It was every single
Even more so than Too Fast, Too Furious?
Yes. It was every single thing that people loved about like Fast and Furious 6, but it was before the Fast and Furious movies did it, so everyone rejected it out of hand. There is a fight scene with Monet Mazer and Jamie Presley.
I love Jamie Presley.
Where they're on motorcycles and they are at opposite ends of like a track of road. Jamie Presley is like posed perfectly in front of a huge Pepsi billboard, while Monet Mazer is posed perfectly in front of a huge Mountain Dew billboard. And then they like zoom at each other at 100 miles an hour, which means they should have passed each other a minute ago, but it's super cool.
Stopping to enjoy a refreshing soda.
Yeah. And then they slide past each other, power slide, where like one of them like pops a wheelie backwards, so Monet Mazer is like sliding underneath Jamie Presley's rear tire, and then they like lift up the front of their bikes, so the front of their bikes punch each other. It's the coolest thing ever, and it puts the only part that people like from Mission Impossible 2 to shame.
Wow.
Like that's my take on Mission Impossible 2. Torque is better.
Then several years pass. Mission Impossible 3 comes out. Nobody really asked for it, but they did it anyway, and it's fine.
This is actually like was my favorite one until Rogue Nation came out, and the reason why is because the action isn't as incredible. There's some good bits. I think that drone attack on the bridge is really cool, but like, it's actually like a pretty good story. It's about Ethan Hunt literally just trying to kind of retire. He's just training new agents. He's not in the field anymore.
He gets married to Michelle Monaghan, who is underused in this whole series.
Real tragedy. And
you know what? Michelle Monaghan is underused in life.
Yeah.
What was that horrible one she was in, like Eagle Eye or something? Or,
with Shia LaBeouf.
Shia LaBeouf.
Oh, God, she was in that, wasn't she? That movie's terrible.
It's like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. It's like that's the highlight for her, and then filmmakers just aren't doing enough with it.
She was on True Detective, but she also didn't have enough to do in that as well. But Mission Impossible 3 is actually like, the setup is real simple. What if Mission Impossible had a great villain? And the villain is Owen Davian, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, who eats the movie. He spreads cream cheese on it and just takes a huge juicy bite.
I don't think he's not really chewing scenery. He's playing it totally. He underplays his villain role.
That's the thing that's amazing. That's what makes him steal the movie, because he's taking it seriously in a way no one else is.
Like near the end, like where his plans have been foiled and he's just angry and he's underplayed and he's Philip Seymour Hoffman, so you're like truly terrified of this guy because he's not yelling. He just grabs Ethan Hunt by the scruff of the neck and starts dragging him across a bridge toward Michelle Monaghan, who's I think passed out, or maybe she's knocked out. She's just prone. And he's just dragging him, and he says as casually as he possibly can, "Come here, I'm going to kill her while you watch." And it's like, oh my God, this is horrifying.
That's the thing. He's amazing. He manages to steal the movie without overacting for a second. It's incredible. I really think Mission Impossible 3 is, from a story perspective, the second best Mission Impossible movie. The movie that got everyone else on board with Mission Impossible again was actually Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is good. I like Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. The stunts are absolutely phenomenal. That whole sequence at the Burj Khalifa is phenomenal. Yeah, we're called
Tom Cruise. And this is Tom Cruise is, we talk about the directors, but Tom Cruise has been sort of the creative force behind most of these. Yeah. He's acted as producer. He has insisted on doing at least one spectacular stunt himself in each of them, especially as they reached Ghost Protocol. So he actually did sort of do this really dangerous stunt where he's climbing on the exterior of a building. Never mind that it's like magic sticky glove technology.
It's still fun. And what's cool with that one is that all of the cool technology they have always breaks from Ghost Protocol onward. That's like Chris McQuarrie's thing. It always breaks.
Well, it's more interesting when it breaks.
It absolutely is. It's like more fun. He's at a loss.
One of my favorite like superhero fights in a superhero movie is in Iron Man 3, when he only has like pieces of his suit.
Oh, that's a fun one. Yeah. You and I like that movie more than a lot of people.
Why do people dislike that film?
It's so good.
It's like the second or third best one. It's like the second best one.
It's damn good.
After the first Iron Man.
But my thing with Ghost Protocol, and the reason why I didn't consider it the greatest thing ever, was the villain sucks. The villain just wants nuclear bombs. He's going to shoot nuclear bombs. He doesn't have...
I barely even remember like plot details of that movie.
He has no dialogue with Ethan Hunt. And the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie are just them punching each other. They have... It's just... an objective argument. I want to blow up the world. Well, I'd prefer you didn't. Like, I'm not
punch,
really
yeah.
emotionally invested in that the way I was when, like, Owen Davian literally killed Ethan Hunt and Michelle Monaghan has to stop him and then somehow bring Ethan back to life. Like, that's a great fit. But yeah, Rogue Nation was, I think, the film that got the formula right. I think they had a good villain. They had a great supporting cast. It was all a team, which they focused on more since the third one. The stunts were insane.
It was the Fast Five thing where they finally brought like everyone together. I know they did that in Ghost Protocol, but I feel like it sort of gelled with Rogue Nation. So yeah, we finally had the team back, and it was an important team because we had met them all now.
Yeah. So we had Simon Pegg, and we had Ving Rhames, and we had Alec Baldwin, and we had, I think Alec Baldwin was new to Rogue Nation, but yeah, it worked. The whole movie worked. And then we have Mission Impossible Fallout, which is actually more so than ever before a direct sequel to the previous film. It is not just
it's the same
next
villain.
adventure. Yeah, the villains come back. It actually deals with the repercussions of the last movie. Like, because the Rogue Nation referred to basically an organization as complicated as the CIA, which was comprised of terrorists. It's basically their version of Spectre.
Spectre, yeah, I was about to say.
Which is fine. I don't care. It's an evil organization of bad guys. Who gives a shit? That's cool. And
I love the way they give you that sort of information in action movies now. Because they have to essentially give a PowerPoint presentation to the audience. Yeah. And so they've developed these in-action film technologies that essentially just sort of project it on a wall and have these cute little animations to sort of make it clear for you. And this mysterious person, and then we'll have like a blank Facebook profile picture sort of float into the middle of the screen. Yeah. And they're connected to all these people, and like spider legs will grow out of them. And I feel for the graphic designer who works for IMF who had to put that thing together. Like
you have to have top security clearance in order to make that video.
Yeah. So there is somebody who is just an animator and a graphic designer who has to put together this PowerPoint presentation, probably like an intern or like a team of interns.
Too.
And really quickly.
Do you have any idea how long it takes to render that shit in After Effects? It's nuts.
And you can't make any spelling errors. You have to make sure the locations are right. Like if somebody's in Turkey, you have to make sure like the little dot is like the right spot where Istanbul is. That's got to be really tough.
Yeah, it's not easy, that job. And you know what? I know it sounds like we're making fun of it. Our point is we respect that person.
I respect that person.
That person is underappreciated and deserves a raise. Everyone's giving Ethan Hunt all this fucking credit. That person deserves a raise.
Or a movie about the person who designs those little miniature topographical maps that the villains can point to with sticks saying, and then we'll bomb here and our factory's over here. It's like, wait a minute, this mountain's not tall enough.
Is this to scale? What is this?
Get Brett in here. You know, it's a movie all about Brett.
Anyway, so the idea of Rogue Nation is, the other fallout is that the Rogue Nation has collapsed because Ethan Hunt took down their leader, but now there's a whole bunch of splinter cells, and they're really pissed, and they're doing a whole bunch of really bad stuff, and one of the things that they've done is they've stolen a bunch of nuclear bombs. They steal them from Ethan Hunt, who was trying to retrieve them at the beginning of the movie, so this is kind of on him.
They're little itty-bitty ones, too. Like, you can fit them in a shoe.
So he's got to get them back, and he has to go undercover as this bad guy. No one knows what the bad guy looks like, so no one knows it's not Ethan Hunt. Henry Cavill joins the team, and he's like the CIA agent who's like all brute force and doesn't understand why they do things like spy. He doesn't understand the concept of spying.
I do like Henry Cavill's character.
He's fun.
And I like the dynamic. I wish they had more scenes together, he and Ethan Hunt.
That's the
like
fun
where they
of
just
this
got
for me,
where they just got to converse and sort of compare their philosophies.
I like the idea of this like older, experienced, really like. I mean, yeah, he's still like he'll like ditch the government on a whim just to go off and do whatever he wants. He's done it like 6 times now, but like he knows what he's doing. And Henry Cavill is younger, more impulsive, and more brash, but he's super fucking tough. Like, he's just like, Henry Cavill is fucking huge. Like, Superman doesn't actually sell how big Henry Cavill is. And he's, like, really imposing. So, like, you've actually got, like, a fun, odd couple set up here. And you're right. They do precious little with it.
Like, they do a lot at the beginning, but then it kind of, when the plot gets going, they start changing focus a little too quickly.
And I'm not going to ruin the movie because there are twists, and I do appreciate that Christopher McQuarrie actually finds a way to incorporate elements and characters from pretty much all the Mission Impossible movies from the first one onward, like even the rock climbing scene in Mission Impossible 2 is kind of important because it sets up something.
There's an action sequence that kind of ties into that.
We wouldn't believe that Ethan Hunt could do that unless we had already seen him do it in Mission Impossible 2. That's my point. Like, it'd be like, hey, come on.
I can't believe anything Tom Cruise does because he's 56.
Yeah.
And he's doing things that humans shouldn't be able to do.
He is older now than Wilford Brimley was when he starred in Cocoon. Cocoon.
People said that in the last movie too.
Cocoon is a movie about how old Wilford Brimley is. Just so we're clear.
To be fair, Wilford Brimley looked like he was 50 when he was 13.
I know. It's funny. You know, like aging is different now in Hollywood. People don't age the way that they used to.
My favorite stunt,
Tom Cruise should, by all rights, not be the star of an action movie. Not that this isn't ageism or anything. It's just normally this would be the case. He would not be starring in action movies 20 years ago. He would have settled down and done like serious character work from this point on. Now he gets all this cool shit, and you know what? Good for him. He pulls it off. He looks like he's comfortable doing it.
I remember reading an article about sort of the tragedy of the transformation of Tom Cruise into an action hero. If you look back at sort of his early career, he wasn't an action hero.
No.
He did a great variety of different kinds of stuff, like Cocktail, and then a racing movie, and then Far and Away, and then he works with Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah,
and he always
Jerry
tries
Maguire,
to.
a lot of his biggest hits are not like A Few Good Men was a huge hit. The Firm was a huge hit.
These are not action spectaculars.
They're not. In fact, Mission Impossible is kind of the only one he did for a really long time.
And there was this turning point in his career when he just wasn't getting traction about the time of the jumping on Oprah's couch incident when he's
around Mission Impossible 3.
Yeah, when his credibility started to falter a little bit in the public eye.
Well, people started to see him as less stable.
Yeah, I guess. And so he kind of had to start relying on these big franchises. And, thank goodness he has in one way, because these Mission Impossible movies have just increased in quality as we've gone along.
And ironically, they're the only movies he does that are hits.
Yeah.
Like Jack Reacher was great, by the way. I didn't see the sequel. The first one's really good.
The sequel is not good.
That doesn't surprise me. But like, he's done some good movies here and there. They do not make the money that Mission Impossible does.
Remember when everybody was frothing about how great Edge of Tomorrow was and nobody wanted to go see it?
That movie kicks ass. But like,
Edge of Tomorrow's really good. So we're up to Mission Impossible Fallout, and the action has never been better. And I haven't seen action sequences like this since the 90s, frankly, where they just
Rogue Nation.
Since Rogue Nation. But just things that are this well filmed and stringently choreographed and stringently photographed so that you get to see every bit of the action with the utmost clarity.
And you can do that because they're actually doing these insane things. Like Tom Cruise apparently jumped out of a plane 100 times to do the skydiving sequence.
All right.
Just to film the skydiving sequence. And it shows. It looks amazing. Like, it's really great. And as a stunt spectacular, I agree. Fallout is absolutely phenomenal from like start to finish. It's a real thrill, and like the climax in particular. I'm not going to ruin what happens, but like, you've seen some of it in the trailer, so it won't blow your mind. But it's so expertly crafted and so huge and epic that it's really quite stunning
and well paced. This is one of the few action films I've seen where I'm not bored by the big final action sequence.
I was bored in the middle.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and this is my problem with Fallout, and you brought it up as well. Although the action is astounding, the story is kind of spinning its wheels. They introduce a new element, like a new character, a new sort of counterpoint to Ethan Hunt. Henry Cavill doesn't get to do much. Ultimately, it's a story of, we got to get these bombs back. I got to impersonate this guy.
Yeah.
Okay. But a huge chunk of it is just planning how we're going to impersonate this guy and how to get the bombs back. And all of that stuff is kind of the least interesting stuff. It feels like busy work. It feels like they're just trying to make everything between the big action sequences seem bigger than it actually needs to be and more complicated than it actually needs to be.
They were so focused, the filmmakers, on making those action sequences so spectacular. And, there's motorcycle chase, which is unbelievably thrilling, that they forgot to put characters in it. Yeah. And we have characters that are now kind of dear to us after 6 movies.
Sure.
Ethan Hunt is, his story's over, but we have Ilsa Faust now, and they bring her back, and she does the same thing.
Yeah, she's the X Factor again.
The whole point of Rogue Nation was that she was doing this. We didn't know what her motives were.
Yeah.
We didn't know how
if she
good
was undercover. If she was undercover and then she turned.
And a big part of her story is she was trying to get out of the life. And she was successful.
She had a journey, she had an arc, and it ended.
And we bring her back, and she's an X Factor again, doing the same sort of stuff.
Exactly the same sort of stuff. They're just like, hey, now you gotta, you know that thing we let you go for?
Yeah, they had to
now you have to finish it again.
Yeah, like
what?
they had to walk back her arc a little bit. And that was really disappointing because I love her character, and I'd love to see her just be on Ethan Hunt's side.
And they walk back, and this is really frustrating for me. Ilsa Faust and Ethan Hunt had a sexual chemistry.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Tom Cruise, I think he's a good actor. Say what you will about all the personal stuff, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't have a lot of sexual chemistry with a lot of his co-stars.
No.
He's not, he's dashing, but he's not actually the most passionate leading man.
Which weirdly works in his favor in something like Eyes Wide Shut, which is all about sex, and it's kind of about how there's a wall between him and sex, and he can't really reach through that wall.
It's basically a long anxiety dream where he keeps almost having sex, but fate still constantly steps in.
I love Eyes Wide Shut.
It's brilliant. And I think it's an argument to be made it's his best performance, but he actually had some pretty natural chemistry with Rebecca Ferguson, which is noteworthy in his career. And they didn't go there, partly because Ethan Hunt was still married. And he was just living his life, he was doing his job, and they kind of embraced that in Rogue Nation. So that went kind of, was just a little undercurrent, and it never went anywhere. Here, it feels like we're bringing Ilsa Faust back, and you see from a dream sequence at the beginning, Michelle Monaghan is back in the movie, at least in his mind. And it really feels like they worked overtime to try to make Ilsa Faust into the, quote, love interest. And boy, does that piss me off, because that's literally all they give her other than, and I'm back, and I might be against you, but usually I'm with you. Depends on whether or not the action sequence requires it. It's actually really not. And it's just kind of a not great screenplay overall. There's also this
these movies are written on the fly by 30 screenwriters, and we say this all the time about movies, but it's rare that you can see that on the screen. Rogue Nation felt really tight. I'm sure it had the same phenomenon. We have screenwriters coming in, they're rewriting scenes as they go.
Was directing it as well, so he was able to keep it focused all bad.
And so this time, though, it does feel like they're really tacking things on to just make the story make any kind of sense.
This whole storyline about Ethan Hunt has to impersonate this bad guy, so we're never going to meet that bad guy, right? Worst telegraphed twist I can remember. There's literally only one person it can be. Literally only one character in the movie makes any sense.
I almost in my head I was hearing that line from Clue. To make a long story short, too late.
The only thing that would have been a big surprise, and I'm gonna tell you this doesn't happen just so you don't get too excited and get bummed out. But if it looks like all the arrows are pointing to this one character. It's obviously this person who's betraying everybody. But actually what happens right at the big reveal, they cut to that character, and out from behind him, Jeremy Renner walks out. That would be kind of fun. That would have been ooh, I didn't see that coming. Well done.
Or it's just Matt Damon as Jason Bourne.
Something. That would have been amazing. So, the story is actually kind of crap. And that bugs me, because everything else about it is so expertly crafted. And I want you to see this movie because it is cool. But I'm hearing people call it...
It's just amazing to watch. It's really exciting.
People call it the best action movie of the decade, and I'm not with this script.
Okay, you know what?
It's really good, and it's okay if you want to have it in that conversation, but man, this does not compare to Mad Max Fury Road or John Wick
or White House Down. Yeah,
you and I are the only two people who think that.
I'm standing by it.
I'm just saying that's maybe not the best hill to die on in this conversation. That might not be the most defensible position on movie fights. I think but there are others. I think even Rogue Nation, I think, has a better claim to that crown. But it's still really cool, and I think you will have a really good time when you watch it. It might be getting built up a smidge too much. And maybe if we were kind of open about the problems it has now, maybe when people finally realize that it has problems, or start to notice on repeat viewings that those things are kind of annoying, as opposed to things we're willing to overlook because the action is cool, maybe we'll mitigate the backlash and we'll still be able to say the movie is really good a year from now.
Yeah. So I'm still going to give it a C+ on a C+ to C- scale. It's just really exciting. It's thrilling from beginning to end. I like all of the performances. We didn't even mention Job Jr., who shows up in this movie. Job was played by Vanessa Redgrave in the original. And now we have, I think it's her daughter.
It's her daughter. Max's daughter. Is
Max's daughter.
That's a mild, surprise, but it's okay.
She's cool great because she is she's really chewing scenery and swinging for the walls.
Well, she's playing Vanessa Redgrave,
so
you might as well.
She's playing young Vanessa Redgrave via Jessica Rabbit.
You are something of a paradox.
You're something of a paradox. Oh, hello, Tom Cruise. I'm going to stick my tongue in your mouth. And there's not fuck all you can do about it.
I love how you managed to make an actually sexy scene sound like Baron Harkonnen is about to spit on you.
I'm going to spit on your face. And she's great because she really has this sort of super villainess quality that adds a lot of verve to the movie.
I want to see more of her. I actually want more of that character. So I give it a C+ too. I have critiques. I think they're legit critiques. But mostly they just make it not my favorite Mission Impossible movie. It's still a really good Mission Impossible movie, and the stunts alone are worth the price of admission. And I'm the only one who saw Puzzle. I'm going to give Puzzle a mild C+. Not oh my god, you have to run out and see this. But if you do see it,
you'll find something pleasant.
I bet you'll dig it, and I bet you'll really appreciate Kelly MacDonald's performance. That's my Puzzle review.
I tried to make it to Teen Titans Go to the Movies.
Yeah, me too. I hear it's really great.
I hear it's really great, and it's failing. It opened at number 9 at the box office. No one wants to see this one.
It feels like a TV show that got put on the screen. People just aren't super
which
stoked
is what
about
it is.
But people aren't super stoked about that. The Ninjago movie didn't do that well either. So you're only kind of catering to that demographic. That said, I like that show. I want to see that movie. I'm broke, so I couldn't go see it, and I missed the critic screening. So let's transition, shall we, to the magical world of Tim Burton. I'm curious what younger film goers and film fans think of Tim Burton, because you and I were there for the ascendancy of Tim Burton. We remember a time before Tim Burton, when the initial films of Tim Burton, in particular stuff like Beetlejuice and Batman and Nightmare Before Christmas, late 80s, early 90s glut.
Yeah.
Felt incredibly new and fresh.
Yeah.
And now he's an institution. He kind of invented Hot Topic. Hot Topic piggybacked off of his aesthetic and sold that to the masses. And now he seems like he's a really corporate icon. I don't know what vibe people get off of it.
Lydia Dietz, the character played by Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice, kind of, I don't want to say she invented, but she really definitely codified goth. For a whole generation.
Cure predates Lydia Dietz.
I know the Cure and Bauhaus and a lot of the music scene predates Lydia Dietz, but she is the first proper goth I remember seeing in a feature film.
Unless the Addams Family counts, and they were on TV at the time. They were in a movie
they're sort of proto goth, but
in terms of, she was a goth icon. Not only was she interested in the morbid and the unnatural, she had that very particular black style, everything looked really cool.
Cadaverous.
Yeah, cadaverous is the way I'm looking for. She looked like she stepped out of a German Expressionist movie, but in a cool teenager way. And she was an icon for a lot of people. So that was kind of Tim Burton's niche. But
Tim Burton invented, I guess we could say, pop goth.
He invented neo-German Expressionism, because Tim Burton's aesthetic didn't come out of nowhere. When we think of Tim Burton, with notable exceptions, he's done a few very bright and colorful movies and a couple movies that sort of challenge what we expect of him visually. But for the most part, his films are very steeped in an old tradition of cinema that we've touched on this podcast before when we talked about Nosferatu, called German Expressionism. And the idea basically is, much like expressionistic painting, we create an image of the way things feel and the way we think of things, and not necessarily literally the way they are.
It's how your brain and your heart sees it rather than how your eyes see it. And German expressionist cinema dealt typically with long shadows, strange angles, kind of turning the background into something kind of abstract and the characters into dolls that live within that landscape.
If you want to see the birth of Tim Burton, you don't need to watch his parents' date. You need to watch The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is one of the first like feature-length like German Expressionist horror movies, and
it's great and it's terrifying.
It's really good. It actually holds up really well just because it's really striking. And it is a story of a mad doctor, Dr. Caligari, who has a hypnotized zombie.
A somnambulist.
Who will do anything he says, and what he says is kidnap women. And it's really, the sets are literally painted. Like on like the shadows are painted on the walls. Like it's so specifically unnatural.
I think it's Rob Zombie's Living Dead Girl that pretty much remakes Dr. Caligari. Have you seen that music video?
I've seen a couple of things kind of remake it as well. And like, it's a phenomenal motion picture, and it kind of gave birth not just to Tim Burton, but everything else that inspired Tim Burton. And the other big influence on Tim Burton is the Hammer horror films.
Yeah.
Now, the Hammer tradition is something
which he made one of. We'll get to it.
He did, and it's actually one of my favorite of his movies. The Hammer horror tradition, Hammer was a British film studio in the they've been around for a while, but in the 1950s, they basically made themselves into the big horror studio, not unlike what Blumhouse is today.
In England. They were cult hits in America, but they were really big in England.
There weren't a lot of studios that when you heard the name of a studio, you knew what kind of film they made. Today we have Pixar and Blumhouse.
In the golden age of Hollywood, you could. Like Warner Brothers made a certain kind of film.
That's true, but I'm talking about really specific. They had a niche. And like American International would become like the Schlock House. And,
God bless you, AIP.
Yeah, and Disney made the animated stuff, obviously, and Ealing made the silly comedies, and Hammer made the horror movies. And when Hammer did horror movies, they did Dracula, they did Frankenstein, they did The Wolfman, they did The Mummy, and they sexed them up. Everything was heaving bosoms and bright red poster paint blood.
A lot of, like IB Technicolor prints out there of just the bright colors.
Today, a lot of those movies, some are still pretty kinky, but like a lot of them, they're not going to seem as extreme today as they did at the time. At the time, they were violent. They were lustful. They were wrathful. They had great actors. They had Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and a ton of other great people. And they were visually dynamic because they were really deeply colored. Like the coloring, they were color films, but they had a really like sensual richness to the color. That is another thing that Tim Burton would eventually play with quite a lot. Tim Burton worked his way up as an animator initially.
He was born in Burbank, where Disney is headquartered, and
so it was destiny, practically.
So he kind of just was into these monster movies. He grew up sort of in his background in the shadow of Disney, making monster movies in his backyard, and just sort of drifted into the Disney circle, where he was a designer and an animator.
He worked on Fox and the Hound and Black Cauldron.
The Black Cauldron, Disney's biggest bomb, and
well animated.
Well animated sucks, but
actually is really bad.
It's not a good movie.
But my God, is it gorgeous?
Lloyd Alexander, go back and do it again because he deserves more.
And while he was working at Disney, he produced a series of shorts, and we're only going to talk about like two of them. Really?
Well, there's two notable ones. There was Vincent and there was Frankenweenie.
Yeah,
which are now readily available on like Nightmare Before Christmas Blu-rays and stuff.
Yeah, and you can even watch them online. But like Vincent is a short stop motion animated film, and Tim Burton is of course at least partly responsible for repopularizing stop motion animation after the form had been kind of tossed aside. It is a poem. It is a dark poem about a little boy who is obsessed with Vincent Price. Vincent Price was the iconic star of many horror movies in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Scream for your life.
Yeah, he has a gloriously, like, sort of melodramatic, theatrical performance. Great mustache, handsome as the Dickens.
Like, a very good actor too. Like he started in Otto Preminger's Laura, and he's very good in
a lot of the great horror icons, be they Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff.
These are like classically trained actors.
They're good actors. They got pigeonholed, but they're good actors, and if you give them a good role, they knocked it out of the park. And often if you give him a bad role, they also knocked it out of the park. So this kid is obsessed with Vincent Price, and particularly the Vincent Price Edgar Allan Poe movies that he made with Roger Corman, most of which were quite good. The Tomb of Ligeia is fantastic. The Pendulum is fantastic.
I like Tales of Terror, but yeah, that's...
Okay, there you go. So it's a poem about this kid who's obsessed with it, and it's all just like Vincent is like walking his dog, isn't that cute? But in his head, the dog is like a horrible zombie. He's prowling the neighborhood.
And his obsession kind of drives him insane, and that's the end of the short.
Yeah, it always weirds me out. It's
really dark.
It always weirds me out because I'm actually really taken with Vincent, because that's the kind of thing I was a little bit obsessed with. I was obsessed with little dark fantasies, and I read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe when I was a kid. Yeah, Vincent, it's a little ambiguous just how insane Vincent goes. Is he just like having like a bad trip, or has Vincent completely lost his mind at the end of that? And I honestly don't know. And I think that's one of the great things about Vincent. I think it's one of the reasons why all these years later people keep rediscovering it and loving it, because it's a great short.
It really is a great short. And it's codified Tim Burton right away. There's certain artists who are kind of fully formed right when they start, even if they start as like teenagers or something. Like you listen to the early stuff of Devo, it's like they're already Devo. They didn't like they kind of refine their sound, but they're already the band that they were going to be.
Did you ever see like a documentary about Steven Spielberg where they show you like the 8mm home movies he made, and they're already Saving Private Ryan but with action figures? Like he knew his thing. He had his aesthetic kind of worked out pretty early.
So yeah, he liked the sort of the dolls they use for Vincent are really reminiscent of the dolls he used in Corpse Bride decades later. So and
Frankenweenie, though.
And Frankenweenie as well. Yeah, he still had this very clear master aesthetic that he drew from these movies that inspired him, and it's fascinating to see that his obsessions never changed. Yeah. He grew and changed a little bit as a filmmaker, but after a while we started, and we'll get to this when we get later in his career, but he started to rely on this master aesthetic a little too strongly. With Vincent, it must have been just like a shot in the arm.
Tim Burton's style is his substance, and when he is dealing with material that uses that aesthetic to help convey a story and to help sell a character, he has something to say about that, and you can tell it gets really personal. And when it doesn't, you can tell he's kind of floundering and relying on how interesting he can make it look. And we'll talk about that a lot. So Vincent was a short he made in 1982. He did a couple other shorts. Then he made Frankenweenie in 1984. Frankenweenie
first live-action short.
Yeah, which is like 20, 30 minutes long. And it's a story of a young boy, very much modeled after young Tim Burton,
who's named Frankenstein.
Yeah, he has his dog. He loves his dog. His dog gets hit by a car, and he brings his dog back to life.
In his attic, using like a kid version of the Frankenstein lab.
Yeah, and he looks like Spuds McKenzie. It's just this cute squat dog, and the dog is now covered in stitches and has bolts and everything. I don't know if it has bolts, but
it does. It has bolts in the neck.
And like he just starts running around and kind of terrorizing the neighborhood, but in mostly pretty innocuous ways. But this very heightened suburban community starts getting up in arms and starts chasing after him with pitchforks, and it's just. I love this story, and I love both versions of it, and we'll talk about the feature-length version in a bit. I love it because it turns the Frankenstein story away from sort of unchecked objective science into basically who would want to raise the dead? Someone who actually loved someone. Like, there's actually something really sweet and tender, and everyone sympathizes with the Frankenstein monster because the Frankenstein monster is ultimately the victim, I think.
He's the victim, but he's also terrifying and also a murderer, but the Frankenweenie is a cute, pudgy little dog.
He's a cute, pudgy little dog, but I think the movies don't really try. I can't think of a single Frankenstein movie that does a good job of making you really sympathize with Dr. Frankenstein, because he's the one at fault. He's the monster here. Like, you'd say Frankenstein does horrible things, and he does, but there's a reason why, and we're given a sympathetic backstory for him. Dr. Frankenstein, not so much. So here we have a sympathetic story for Dr. Frankenstein, and he's just a kid who actually raised the dead. We should be praising the 12-year-old who did it. There's a reason he didn't think out the ramifications. He's 12. It's pretty neat. But it's a good short. Like, it's really expertly crafted.
And when they turned it into a feature, they actually did kind of explore it in a lot of interesting ways.
Yeah, I actually really dig it, but we'll talk about that in a minute. A year after Frankenweenie, he made his first feature film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And this really sticks out like a sore thumb in his whole... and I love it. But it sticks out like a sore thumb in his filmography. Like, he did nothing else like this. Really.
Well, he's done like pre-existing characters before because he did Batman, for goodness sake. But
this kind of light comedy, though, this kind
not
of really
not as
comedy?
not as a light comedy, and this was more dictated by Pee-wee, and I think they were a good match.
Yeah.
Paul Rubens appeared in other Tim Burton films as well, yeah, Pee Wee Herman had Pee Wee's Playhouse on TV. He was invented on stage as part of the Groundlings or the Second City. One of those two. I think it's the Second City character. And yeah, it came time to bring Pee Wee to the big screen. Paul Rubens wanted to make this film, and Tim Burton was just a good match. And so there's a few like effect sequences and a few like dream sequences that feel very much Tim Burton.
Yeah, there's a bit where
Tim Burton also attracted the musical talents of Danny Elfman, who does like about half of the heavy lifting in most of Tim Burton's movies.
Yeah, he did the music for all but like three
or
Tim
four
Burton
of his movies. Yeah.
Pee-wee's Big Adventure is basically the Pee Wee Herman version of The Bicycle Thief or Bicycle Thieves.
Yeah.
Pee-wee is an amateur inventor. He kind of like rules the roost in his hometown. Like he's
okay.
His life is his own. And
his life is divorced from reality.
My point is this.
He lives in a cave of whimsy that somehow is separate from the planet Earth.
I guess my point is he's like a kid who never has to leave his bedroom because that's where all his toys are. And there
were a lot of characters like that in the 1980s.
Yeah.
See that, like Ernest P. Worrell we talked about.
Yeah. So he's kind of like this stunted child, and it turns out that his arch nemesis is also a stunted child, but he's like a spoiled rich kid. And for his birthday, his dad said he can have anything he wants, and he wants Pee-wee's awesome bicycle. And Pee-wee's like, well, you can't have it. It's mine. It's one of a kind. I made it. So no.
This is the kind of rivalry that 5-year-olds would have.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why.
That's the way they talk to each other too.
That's one of the reasons why the movie is so charming, is because it does feel like these are big kids, and kids really responded to seeing adults act like this, and worked for Ernest P. Worrell as well. So the guy steals the bike, and Pee-wee goes off on basically a cross-country adventure to try to find his bike. And on the way, he meets all kinds of crazy people. He runs into like a spectral trucker with the most horrifying face that terrified children everywhere. And like, that's a Tim Burton moment. That's a scary ass fucking scene.
It's the same. I think it's the same animator that did that freaky transformation at the end of UHF.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
It's the same thing.
Yeah. And it's honestly, it's charming as hell. It leads to like this great backlot chase where Pee-wee like flies through every single movie ever and rescues a whole bunch of animals.
But again, this is Pee-wee's joint.
Yeah,
like Tim Burton is not dictating anything. He's just sort of,
I think,
getting to know what feature film making is. He did a little bit of stop motion animation. You can tell there's a lot of his interests in here.
There's a lot of experimentation.
Yeah, it doesn't yet feel like him. A lot of the way Vincent did.
A lot of the sequences in it feel like Tim Burton kind of stretching himself out a bit. Like there's a romantic sequence, quasi-romantic, with like Pee Wee Herman, and I think she's like a waitress, and they're inside the mouth of a dinosaur. Like that's a great bit, and it's very Tim Burton-esque in terms of that's what he would think is romantic. That's kind of sweet.
Well, what he really thinks is romantic is that sort of cutesy morbidity that we see in Corpse Bride, but we'll get to that as well.
Before we move on, and I like this movie a lot. Before we move on, one of my favorite jokes of the 1980s is in this, and it's the scene. I want you to do it with me because I know you know where it goes. Pee-wee's on the phone, and he's talking.
I'm preparing,
He's on the phone with his almost girlfriend, Dottie, and she's like, where are you? And he's like, I'm in Texas. You're in Texas? Here, I'll prove it to you. The stars at night are big and bright.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
Like everyone does it.
Everyone around, he shouts out of the phone booth. He's deep in the heart of Texas, and everybody claps and sings along.
It's a funny joke. Made me laugh. He did a couple of TV shows in like the mid 80s, like between Pee-wee's Big Adventure. He did an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Fairy Tale Theater. But his next big movie, and this was the clarion call of Tim Burton. This was everything Tim Burton. Like, it's like he held nothing back.
He finally got
movie.
to do what he wanted to do.
And what he wanted to do was a movie called Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice, before we even talk about the movie, I want to think about this title for a second. Imagine, if you will, you've never heard of a movie called Beetlejuice. Like, it did not exist. You knew that there is a movie coming out in the near future called Beetlejuice. That's a disgusting name.
Yeah.
We've gotten immune to it, but it's a really weird name for a movie.
And the character is named after, the character from mythology, Beetlejuice, Geuce, and
Betelgeuse,
which is pronounced Beetlejuice, and there's a star in the heavens called Beetlejuice, but the film spells it phonetically, like the juice of a beetle, and that's really gross.
It's really gross.
And it has a very strange premise. It is about a really square Ozzie and Harriet type couple,
played by Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis.
In a weirdly poignant early scene, they talk about how they just weren't able. Like, somebody mentions kids, and Gina Davis just sort of like sinks back. And somebody apologizes for bringing it up. So you can tell that they had tried to have kids in the past and just weren't able to. Yeah. So there's this weird darkness to these two people.
Yeah, there's a real emotional earnestness
but they
to them.
really, really love each other. They bond over weird things. Like, they really love Harry Belafonte. And
like he builds like a huge model
of this tiny town that they live in, and they have a really, really loving relationship. There's Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, and they die. They get
really horribly.
They get in a car wreck and they drown, but they don't know it for a second. They kind of show up back in the house, and then they start saying things. Wait a minute, how did we get back to the house? I don't remember that.
We don't have a reflection in the mirror.
Then there's no reflection in the mirror. Her hand gets set on fire and she feels nothing, and they realize, wait a minute, they're dead.
Yeah.
But death in this world is like a carnival bureaucracy.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And
it's really great.
And they have to go into a horrible waiting room and talk to a caseworker, talking about, wait a minute, why are we in this house? And it turns out when you die, you're sort of assigned a place to haunt. And if you want to be alone, you have to turn into a ghost and scare away the livings, that the biological organisms that invade your space.
There's a line their caseworker Juno has I really liked.
It's played by Sylvia Sidney.
She's so fucking good. And she says, like, haunted houses are hard to come by these days. You should be glad you didn't die in Italy, which is true. If you think about this premise, if everyone who dies, they're assigned a place. If you lived in like a place that has had a huge population for millennia, it's gonna get cramped. They're in like a small Midwestern town. Not that many people have died there. It actually isn't so bad.
And into their little placid, far away Midwestern life move a bunch of neurotic yuppies with no talent and a lot of anger.
Yeah, that's right. You were describing Beetlejuice better than anyone ever has.
So yeah, they're played by Jeffrey Jones, Catherine O'Hara, and their daughter is Winona Ryder.
Yeah, and our heroes want them out. They try to scare them out. They're not good at it.
So they have to enlist the help of the wild card and the star of the movie,
a bio-exorcist named Beetlejuice, played by Michael Keaton, completely unhinged.
I haven't seen him like this in anything else.
Like maybe Night Shift. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. He's completely off the wall, and it's perfect because he's a demon. He's a monster, and he is funny as hell. He's actually pretty scary. Like, the scene where he turns into a snake and tries to eat the whole family.
With some stop motion animation again.
That's actually a very scary scene. Like, they're not afraid to make it scary, but the premise of it is by making death a bureaucracy, you take all of these really horrifying moments. There's like these moments where like Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin are trying to like stretch their faces so they're super scary, and they are, but then they have a banal conversation while they are monsters. That's the kind of the movie in a nutshell. Like, it's just this really funny movie about how, and it's very Tim Burton, everything nightmarish is actually normal and sweet.
And everything normal and sweet is monstrous.
Yeah, like the real monster in the movie is Robert Goulet.
Yeah. And Dick Cavett shows up and wants to say, I've been Lydia's agent for years, and we've been losing money for a long time. What do you mean you're losing money? You hate my work? Yeah, so when she does sculptures, it's like they're these ugly, nonsensical things that that everyone hates and are a blight, and indeed are brought to life and treated as creatures later in the movie.
The modern art that is non-representative and non-expressionist is the villain.
Yeah, when the the Maitlands, the Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, go into the afterlife. They come back into their own home, and they don't recognize it because it's been redesigned by yuppies. And a character named Otho, who is their home decorator / spiritualist, like has completely ruined their lives. They like go into a room. It's like vermilion. You know, he's trying to redesign this little.
Like I love Beetlejuice is great, and I think Beetlejuice it's one of the most distinctive movies.
Yeah,
it's just like no one else could have done it.
It could have only come out at the time when it did. Yeah,
any other filmmaker. There are other filmmakers who probably could have done it well, but no other filmmaker would have done this.
Right. It wouldn't have gotten the traction it did. Like even the script even if you'd give it to somebody who is equally quirky like Joe Dante, it was probably still would have been great. It wouldn't have looked like this. It wouldn't have had the same impact.
Not at all. And it's so weird that he followed that up with Batman.
Yeah. Which, not to put too fine a point out, was the biggest hit of all time when it came out in 1989.
And regardless of whether or not it made more money than anything else of all time, its impact
is still being felt today.
It's insane. Yeah. The impact of Batman, which at the time, it's worth remembering, the comics were great at the time. People had read The Dark Knight Returns. People had read Batman Year One. Batman had been a serious character in the comics for a while. His resurgence in comics as a serious character had already been established. But in the pop consciousness,
that started in the 80s. Like in the 60s and 70s, he was still sort of broad and fun. And
there was still some in the 70s, but
it became sort of like tragic and serious in the 80s.
But in the pop consciousness, Batman was still Adam West. Batman was still this fun. And bear in mind, the Adam West Batman was a huge hit. Like, this wasn't like some weird cultural thing. This was the big version of Batman. So Tim Burton, the guy who made Beetlejuice, is making Batman, and Michael Keaton is going to star in it. Fans were legitimately worried they were going to make some kind of cute, quirky version.
There was an uproar because Michael Keaton was only known for like Mr. Mom at that point, and also Beetlejuice. So
he was casting against type.
Well, he was casting against type, and he was casting, I think. He was thinking about Bruce Wayne more than he was about Batman. Yeah. I get the sense that he didn't care about Batman because Batman is stoic in this version. He's really... Well, it's not an origin story. He's already established, and that's kind of what I like about this version of Batman, that he's already the adult Batman. Well, he's not the kid figuring it out.
I have this interesting sort of take on well, I don't know if it's interesting take on Batman, but it's my take on Batman. Anyway, not to put too fine a point on it, Tim Burton made Batman. Batman was a huge success. Sold millions of tickets, millions of toys. You know, it ended up spawning.
Jack Nicholson is still making money off the toy sales. Oh. That part of his contract was he got a percentage of the merchandising,
which everyone was yeah, sure, whatever you want, Jack.
Which meant he made probably over $100 million just from this one role.
One of the smartest business deals in Hollywood history. Just boom. And then that in turn inspired Batman the Animated Series, which helped change the animation industry for television in particular.
Well, Bruce Timm, who designed like after Tim Burton's version, and Danny Elfman did the music for that one as well.
Well, Shirley Walker did the majority of it. They just reused Danny Elfman's score.
Oh, fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sort of changed the way DC comic characters were treated in animation, but I didn't see it leaking into a lot of other things.
No, we saw it, like Disney's Gargoyles had it, like serious action animation started responding to Batman the Animated Series. They had raised the bar.
Yeah.
And we still live in that world where stuff like Young Justice is still like, you know, part of that landscape. That brought serious DC onto television, that laid the groundwork for more live action shows in that vein. We had a lot of live action superhero movies in the 90s, more in the sort of pulp universe, Dick Tracy, the Shadow kind of realm. But the success of Batman would eventually leak into the success of the bringing Blade back, starting the whole Marvel canon, rebooting it to Batman Begins. We live in the world Batman made, and it's easy to see why, because the movie is style personified.
Tim Burton's approach, and I've said this numerous times before, was not to put Batman in the real world, because Batman's kind of a ridiculous concept in the real world.
Yeah.
You walk out onto the street, you see a guy dressed like that, and you're going to run the other way just because you think that guy's insane, because he has weird pointy bits on his helmet.
Even if you just go to Hollywood Boulevard or Times Square or whatever, and you see someone dressed as Batman, they look a little ridiculous.
Yeah. So what he did was create essentially a Caligari world where Batman could exist. It's super Art Deco. The towers are impossibly high in Gotham City. Like, people can fall for like an hour off of one of those towers. Everything's really dark and shadowy. There's all these like WPA sculptures all over Gotham City, and it's in complete squalor. Everybody's poor and horrible in a really sort of studio backlot sort of way.
Yeah. It feels a little fake, but it feels natural to what Tim Burton is doing. And yeah, they created a world for Batman to live in, and as a result, Batman comes to represent basically the institution. Batman he's fighting for justice, blah 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 blah. So his story isn't actually very interesting. In the first one, in many respects, Vicky Vale is the protagonist of Batman.
No. Jack Napier is the protagonist of Batman.
And I was getting to that. In the other respect, Jack Napier, played by Jack Nicholson, is the other protagonist because Jack Napier was part of the tapestry of Gotham City. He was part of the mob. He was betrayed by his boss, who he had previously betrayed, in all fairness.
He bagged his girlfriend.
And he gets shoved into a vat of chemicals, and now he is the only thing in Gotham City that rejects Gotham City. He's the only thing in Gotham City that is bright. And that is the aberration. He is the virus trying to destroy. He yells at this town needs an enema. He is trying to clear out the grossness. And he gets to completely, like, some review said Jack Nicholson steals everything in Gotham City and the movie. Like,
and he's top billed too, because he was the bigger star.
Yeah. And you can see why. He's great. I think Heath Ledger's Joker is arguably a better character, but that's no slight to Jack Nicholson. Hell, that's no slight to Cesar Romero. Like, there really are mostly great Jokers.
Well, and again, I think his age is a big factor. A lot of when he was cast, a lot of people said he's too old to play the Joker, and I do like that he was already a made man, and you get a sense of what he is rebelling against.
Yeah.
He's not just some young punk like Heath Ledger's Joker, and he's not a cartoon character like Cesar Romero. He's a fellow who had a lot to lose and understands what his madness is doing.
You know what it is? It's like Don Corleone or like Michael Corleone, like, lost his mind and became Scarface.
Because that's a good analogy.
When you look at the end of Scarface, like, Scarface has built himself up like this absurd palace of exuberant wealth. The Joker throws himself a parade where he rains money down on Gotham. That's the kind of chaos that he brings. And it's great. The movie is great. The movie is, I think it's a real treat. I think some people, like, sort of reject. The action was never Tim Burton's strong suit, so like it's kind of hard to make out the fight scenes. So if you're really interested in, I just want to see the fight scenes, that's not what this is about. There's
a fight scene in an alleyway where it's shot in shadows, and there are a lot of cuts, and then Vicky Vale is also taking flash pictures during it.
Yeah.
You can't make out anything in that scene.
It's not really about that. Like, action movies aren't necessarily about the action. That's part of it. And like something like Mission Impossible Fallout can, like, totally coast on great action. Batman feels like an action universe that you can move to. And like anything could happen at any time.
It feels like a theme park, and like a dark mirror version of a theme park. And indeed, they turned a portion of Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, into Gotham City many years later. But it has a kind of wonderful artificiality to it that I kind of miss from a lot of genre films.
Yeah, we've started to make our superheroes more natural, and that's great. There's a place for that, but there's also a place for heightened madness. And like Batman and Batman Returns, and I think Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy nails this as well. Just create this like really gorgeous, really gloriously artificial world that just feels like a place you want to go.
I feel like the last superhero film to really try that and do it with a degree of success was actually Ang Lee's Hulk, which nobody likes except for me. But
I think I see elements of that in Doctor Strange's like bizarre kaleidoscopic idea of magic.
In some of the visuals, but the whole world doesn't feel like that.
I agree. I just think there are elements of it that made that movie kind of stand out. From there, Tim Burton decided to make a movie about why there's snow.
Well, he's always been inspired by Fable, and that's actually a big element of the goth lifestyle. There's sort of a cutesy, childish element to the morbidity of the goth lifestyle.
I don't even call it cutesy, childish. I think there is a sort of just innocence. Like there's a simplicity to the narratives. They're just very emotional and strong. And broad.
So he decided to do his own sort of Frankenstein-style fable called Edward Scissorhands, which Johnny Depp has said that this movie sort of saved his life. He was cast as like Heartthrobs, and he hated that. He had done like Crybaby with John Waters previous to this,
which is a really good movie.
That still riffs. Yeah, I like Crybaby a lot. It's the only mainstream rockabilly musical in the world, but he. That was sort of a riff on his heartthrob image, and he hated being a heartthrob, and he was really suicidal. And then he made Edward Scissorhands, where he plays a freak, and he loved doing that. And Edward Scissorhands takes place in this like antiseptic 1950s suburbia world,
much kind of adjacent to Frankenweenie.
Yeah, with a gigantic Gothic castle in the middle of it. Counter to all sense of aesthetic logic, which is kind of where a lot of its power lies. And Diane Wiest plays this doting house Mary Kay salesman.
Is she Mary Kay or Avon?
It's Avon. She's an Avon lady, and she goes up to this castle and finds that there's a creature living there, Edward. And Edward
looks like the somnambulist from Cabinet.
Yeah, he has the outfit. Like he looks like. There's also a lot of Michael Jackson's Bad video going on in his outfit.
Yeah.
He has scissors for hands, wild hair, his face is covered with scars because he can't touch anything, and he's partly mechanical. It's really unclear like how much of him is machine.
Yeah, I remember like when this movie came out, I couldn't get my friends at school to see it with me. And the reason why is because they said it looked like a terrible action movie. He has scissors for hands? That's terrible. I'm like, I don't think that's what it is.
He's not a fighting guy.
Yeah,
it's
the whole
this
point is
peculiar fable
it's
story.
It's a tragedy. Scissors for hands is a quirky image, but then once you think about it, that would suck so hard.
Well, and you see Edward, this weird gangly monster with these gigantic knives on the ends of his hands, wandering through this 1950s placid universe, and you understand how Tim Burton sees himself.
Yeah.
And indeed how any outsider gothy kid saw themselves wandering through these really placid, clean landscapes, and they're the only thing that's black. They're the only thing that like has danger dripping off of it.
Yeah, everything is very pastel except for Edward.
And yet Edward is not an aggressive creature at all. In fact, he's very passive and he's very gentle. And that is a really, really one of the most relatable things about being an adolescent, I think, where you have all of this destructive power, you see yourself as this destructive force, and yet you have no desire to use it.
Yeah.
In fact, all you really want is just a hug, and you can't do it because you have no idea how to touch the world without hurting things.
He is the Frankenstein monster, but the Frankenstein monster eventually like let rage consume him a bit. Edward never does, and that's why this is a sweet story.
Well, he does in the climax.
A little bit, but he's
dumb
really
action
pushed.
climax.
He's really pushed, but like. For me, the other thing I see, a lot of people bring up the fable element, but Edward Scissorhands is treated the way that, like, unusual individuals were treated for many years in, like, high society. You look at the Elephant Man, for example, a very sweet, kind soul by all estimations. And people were sort of fascinated and they wanted to hang out with him and everything. They also didn't want to be his friend. They kept him at arm's length. He is a novelty. And I think Tim Burton is keying into that as well, but he's sort of pointing his finger at everyone. This isn't high society. This is suburbia. This is about the idea of normality.
Yeah.
And that idea of normality is in its way as restrictive as any group. And he's really judgy about those people who would shun Edward, and as a result, it plays like a really broad parable. Yeah. But it's a very effective one, and I love it.
Yeah, it's one of those movies I saw when it came out. I think it came out when I was 12, and I saw it in theaters, and I liked it at the time, and I reacted to sort of its strangeness. I watched it several years later when I was in college, and I was bawling and bawling and bawling. Like I kind of understood a little bit more what it was getting at when I was a little older.
The next movie Tim Burton directed was a movie called Batman Returns.
Where he went a little wilder? And I love him for it because now Batman is a world of insanity that Batman cannot control.
There are people who reject Batman Returns. I am not among you. I love Batman Returns. And I don't just love Batman Returns for its craziness. I'm not like, oh, isn't it funny? There are rocket penguins. Admittedly, that's pretty silly. I think that Batman Returns kind of nails something about superhero movies that we have basically completely ignored now. And that is the idea of dual nature. The idea that there are two sides of you and one side comes out when you put on your mask. That is something that is indicative of...
wholly absent from all modern superhero films, because modern superheroes are about being visible.
Yeah,
and
that's the way the world is now.
And that's the generation that's growing up watching that. It's about putting yourself out there. It's about building your own brand. It's about being your own celebrity. So the superheroes are reflecting that. But Tony Stark is not hiding.
Yeah.
In fact, they don't even use their superhero names. They're just Tony and Steve.
Yeah. In Batman Returns, people's dual natures are still shameful. They are kinky.
Yeah. There's a great sexual element.
They're kinky, they're angry, they're hurt, they're vengeful, and they're corrupt.
They're slimy and they're disgusting.
So this is a story about Bruce Wayne's dual nature between Bruce Wayne and Batman. A story about Selena Kyle, played amazingly by Michelle Pfeiffer, who is a very mousy executive assistant.
Tortured secretary.
And she is literally killed by her boss, and she comes back to life. And she gives no fucks anymore. And her transformation is glorious. It's a story of the Penguin, Oswald Cobblepot, played fantastically by Danny DeVito.
Oh, he's such a monster, isn't he? He's like spewing black spit at all times.
And he's a great version. And honestly, both him and Max Schreck, played by Christopher Walken, they're both...
Max Schreck, the actor who played Nosferatu, by the way.
Yeah. It was originally supposed to be Harvey Dent. But allegedly the studio would have still been obligated to let Billy D. Williams play the role, which is why Billy D. Williams played Harvey Dent in one scene in Batman, because he knew Harvey Dent was important and he wanted to play Two-Face. The studio didn't want him to play Two-Face, so they changed the script so it wouldn't be Harvey Dent, and then they let Tommy Lee Jones be Two-Face in the next movie. Fuck you. If any nugget of that is true, that's a story we told most often. If any nugget of that is true,
it's a good thing we're not. It's a good thing we're not talking about Batman Forever, because there's a lot to unpack.
I know it's better than Batman and Robin, but that's not saying much. But they're all sort of reflections of Bruce Wayne. Oswald Cobblepot is what happens if Bruce Wayne's parents didn't love him. Well, and Max Schreck is what happens if he's not Batman, if he doesn't have a moral compass, and he's a corrupt politician. There's a really great line of dialogue, which is hard to make out because it takes place during an action scene and it gets kind of growled, but in the film's climax, the Penguin leaps on his back and starts screaming at Batman. It's like, you're just jealous because I'm a genuine freak and you have to wear a mask. Yeah. It's a real... And what I love about Tim Burton's two Batman films is they're noir films. They're sold like crime dramas. And one of the central elements of film noir is that it's about the criminals. There aren't heroes in those universes. Everyone's tainted in some way. The cops are, if there are any cops, they're always outside forces that the heroes fear. Or they're corrupt. Or the cops are corrupt. And here's a superhero film without heroes. Yeah. And I think that's a really fascinating approach. Yeah, Batman, in this movie, he actually kind of resents his otherness. And when he sees in Selena Kyle someone who might be a kindred spirit, he's at the end, he's like, let's rescue each other. Let's save each other from these weird lives we have. I like this bit where they're actually they're dating as Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle. And there's that great moment where they accidentally quote each other from a fight scene earlier in the movie. And they realize who each other. That's a great moment. And Selena Kyle has the best line, which is, oh my God, does this mean we have to start fighting? And no, it actually doesn't. But everyone's trapped by this other person that they see themselves as equally as the person they represent. That's something superheroes today, the majority of them, don't hide. These people do. And a lot of people do have something that they hide. Some part of themselves that they're ashamed of, or that they don't like, or that they think other people would judge them for. And Batman Returns fucking gets it, and it is so, I know it's big and weird and strange, but that's how it feels. People feel like the Penguin, people feel like Catwoman, people feel like Bruce Wayne in this particular movie, and all of this connects on that level.
All of this weird personal tragedy in a world where there's like sewer clowns and rocket penguins, and it's just a really strange universe.
I love it.
It's terrific.
I think it might be his most underrated movie. Around this time, we also got Tim Burton's A Nightmare Before Christmas. Or The Nightmare
Before Christmas.
Which was actually directed by Henry Selick. And it was directed by Henry Selick because Tim Burton was contractually obligated to make Batman Returns.
So he was too busy.
Yeah.
And it was already in production because it takes years to make this kind of movie. Which
Especially
is why,
at the time.
Which is why they're not made as often. Thanks to 3D printer technology, it's getting more streamlined.
Yep.
Paranorman was actually a pretty quick production because of that.
Box Trolls as well.
Yeah. The Leica stuff. They can make it a little more quickly.
Yeah, but at the time, it was incredibly painstaking to take all of these models, move them slightly, and Nightmare Before Christmas is not a simple production. You look at a lot of the Rankin Bass Christmas specials, this is obviously based off of, because there was no Halloween special from Rankin Bass when they were doing Rudolph and the Easter Bunny. They specifically gave themselves really complicated tasks. There are moving camera shots where like there are whole crowds of people.
They have to like key in real fire and stuff like that.
It's insane, like the amount of work that went into it. And in fact, this movie was nominated for Best Visual Effects.
Yeah.
At the Academy Awards. It lost to Jurassic Park.
You know what? That's fine.
I know, but like any other year, come on. But it's a story of, and once again, it's a story of Tim Burton. As an outsider, he's the king of Halloween. He has a small nervous breakdown and decides that what he really wants to do is take over Christmas.
The spooky monster that is defined by his spookiness and loves his own spookiness, and what makes him an outsider is that he's tender. That's the central Tim Burton character that we see time and time again.
Yeah. And it's kind of...
Here's what I love about The Nightmare Before Christmas, because it's not about Christmas. So he feels like there's something missing inside of his bony chest. Jack Skellington, who's voiced by Chris Sarandon speaking and Danny Elfman singing. There was some sort of weird contract thing where Danny Elfman was also supposed to be the speaking part, and it's Danny Elfman's opera. A lot of this is him.
Yeah.
He based his lyrics on Tim Burton's poetry, but it's Danny Elfman. And for some reason, they wanted Chris Sarandon to do
magnum opus. And actually, I also want to give a lot of credit to his Batman Returns score, because every character has a theme that complements each other. So when they're in the same room, they're playing the themes together, and they create different pieces of music. It's fantastic.
It's the Firebird Suite.
It's so good,
It's just the Firebird Suite. He takes so much straight from Stravinsky.
Good. Shut up.
But if you listen to the Firebird Suite, it's like, yeah, that's from Batman Returns. That's also from... This whole thing is Batman Returns. But he wanders out of Halloween Land just because he's depressed, and he wanders through the night, and he finds Christmas Land and finds, this is what's filling me up. Christmas Town. And he sees this world of joy and warmth and gift giving, and feels this is what we need. So I'm going to bring it into Halloween Town to share it with everybody. This warmth that we don't have in Halloween Town, which is a world of death and monsters.
And everyone's really nice to each other. They're just obsessed with the morbid.
Yeah, so they can't help but take Christmas and turn it into something morbid. That's where all the humor and all the great visuals come from. Meanwhile, Sally, voiced by Catherine O'Hara, is fascinated by this emptiness within Jack. They realize at the end of the film, in the very, very last shot, that all they needed was love.
Yeah.
That's what Christmas was providing for him. It was
and a very
this
innocent
love,
too, like a very sweet, tender, barely more than friendship, really.
God, it's making me swoon just thinking about it, because it's such a beautiful, beautiful scene right at the end.
They recognize that they each have an emptiness, and they're both looking for
they
a
sing
personal
Sally's
connection.
song, but now it's in a major chord, and now it's such a beautiful musical thing.
We use some of that music at my wedding.
Yeah,
as you may recall.
It was not a hit at first. It was a cult hit, and a lot of like freaky kids in my high school really attached to this thing.
I was a big fan.
I was a big fan. I love the music. I had the soundtrack,
and it just wouldn't die on home video. Like it just kept.
It kept on going on home video, and then at some point along the way, it was put up by Touchstone Pictures, which was owned by the Disney Machine at the time.
Because it was a PG-rated movie, and Disney was afraid it would be like tainting the brand.
Yeah, it was too strange, and it didn't become a big like classic until many years later. And Disney really realized that it had a growing audience. They started putting in the merchandising budget that they ordinarily would put to other animated features and realized that that was being sold. So they started selling that stuff at Disneyland. And it wasn't until then that, they took the Touchstone name off of it and they put Disney on the front.
Like, oh, now we're proud.
Now they're proud of it. And then they started marketing it and they started bringing out these screenings every Halloween. And it kind of sold out in a weird way.
A little bit, but here's the funny thing about something like this. When something like Tim Burton's Batman or Beetlejuice or Nightmare Before Christmas becomes super popular, it's a validation of the outsiders it celebrates. The irony is that when you become the institution, you actually become kind of lame.
You become the insider now, and the outsiders can't look to it any longer.
And eventually Tim Burton will make at least one film that comments on that, but in short order, after a couple more films that we review, we're going to see this start kind of weighing on him, and it starts weighing on audience expectations of him. Tim Burton as a filmmaker hasn't really changed much.
No.
But that's the thing. People want him to. Because we're growing up and he's got his own thing. This is the kind of thing that we celebrate after someone dies, but we get annoyed by when they're alive. When someone dies, we say, oh my God, look at how wonderfully consistent their work is and how they examine the same theme from so many different angles. But when they're alive, we just say, oh, it's the same thing
something
over
different,
and over again. And I'm like, I'm at the point now where I don't think originality is all that important. I think originality is at the very least a little overrated. You can look at something familiar with a new way and make something great.
It depends on how ingrained in the institution we are. And
that's not to say that something unoriginal is inherently good, but it's not inherently bad either. And I'm not going to judge it too harshly.
He did finally stretch the next year with Ed Wood, 1994, which a lot of people still consider his best film. It's not something I'm willing to argue.
No,
he made a sort of an homage to one of his favorite filmmakers, Edward D. Wood Jr., who made the worst movies ever made. Or that was his reputation, at least, thanks to the Golden Turkey Awards.
And having watched his movies, there's a really good argument, especially Plan 9 from Outer Space or Bride of the Monster.
Like these, you can... A lot of people dig it because you can sense the passion of the filmmaker, but he is sort of an outsider who didn't have a lot of talent. And
a lot of the bad filmmakers out there in the world at the time, in the 50s, whenever... They're just bad. They just make boring, bad movies. And, maybe you can watch them, but you don't give a shit. Ed Wood was an auteur. He was a bad auteur, but he was an auteur. And I think this is a thing that I think a lot of people get confused by. The idea of auteur. Auteur is the French word for author, and it is basically a film criticism theory that says that the director is ultimately the author of the work. It's not strictly true, but you can see it more with some directors than others.
Some critics hated that because film is a collaborative medium. It's never just the director, but the director is ultimately the voice.
And some directors do have a very clear through line.
We use the word auteur to describe a director who has a distinct
stamp.
Yeah, something visual or thematic that runs through.
And Tim Burton is definitely one of those.
Well, Tim Burton and Ed Wood was as well. And this is a highly romanticized version of Ed Wood's life. Ed Wood's life is full of depravity and horror and grossness and drug addiction and poverty and wasting away and alcoholism. That is really, there are scenes that were cut from Ed Wood which kind of illustrate just what a heavy drinker he was, and all of that was cut out of the movie.
So Ed Wood was a very passionate but not very talented filmmaker, and that's putting it mildly. But he was also very likable, and he had a really dedicated group of friends and coworkers who kept making movies with him even though they always sucked, just because they liked him. And the screenwriters, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, who we once had on our previous podcast and were great.
They were great, yeah.
With Ed Wood, they kind of pioneered, or at the very least popularized, a different sort of biopic. Most biopics tend to focus on the whole lives of the subject. Their take on the biopic was, let's just focus on the most interesting years. Like pick one story. So when they did The People versus Larry Flint, they focused on the Supreme Court case. When they did
Man on the Moon,
they focused. Well, Man on the Moon was a bit broader actually, but like they focused on the career of Andy Kaufman. When they did Big Eyes, they focused on her years with her really domineering and horrible husband, and we'll talk about that in a minute. With Ed Wood. And in part, they did this because they knew they were going to be pitching it to Tim Burton, who had a very close personal relationship with Vincent Price before he died. They decided to make the story of Ed Wood's close personal relationship with aging horror movie star Bela Lugosi. That gave the movie such a great heart. It gave Martin Landau the best role of his career.
Which he got an Oscar for.
Yep, won 2 Oscars for that and Best Makeup for turning him into Bela Lugosi. And yeah, it's a romanticized version of it because they made it for Tim Burton to tell that story. It works. I haven't revisited Ed Wood. I didn't revisit Ed Wood before this because, unfortunately, Johnny Depp...
Thanks to some of his extracurricular activities, it can be difficult to watch for some people.
And it's a shame because for a long time he was one of my favorite actors.
And he worked and he's worked with Tim Burton innumerable times now. Well, many times now. Yeah. And so
I actually want to backtrack because it's not a shame because he's one of my favorite actors. It's a shame because he did fucking horrible things. It can be rough to be a fan of someone like Tim Burton, though, because you want to revisit a lot of his works, and then there's Johnny Depp.
And he's good friends with Johnny Depp. Yeah. And I don't think he's had any sort of statements about Johnny Depp's bad behavior and the way he's been just angry and horrible and abusive to certain people.
Yeah. But this is, if you can set that aside, and maybe at some point I will, you know, like I can watch a Bing Crosby movie now and divorce it from what I know about him because he's gone. This is a great performance. Like he does this like a plucky young Ronald Reagan like routine as this like he's so hopeful that it's like Candide. Like nothing will ever go right for him, but he will never lose.
It's a great line of dialogue. You're lucky. Patricia Arquette says to an actor, "You're lucky to be working with Ed Wood. He doesn't pass judgment in this town." And Ed Wood just turns to him and says, "Like that's true. If I did, I wouldn't have any friends."
or the bit everyone remembers, which is. So, did you see the movie? What did you think? Worst movie you ever saw? Well, the next one will be better.
Ever the optimist. I've had trouble watching Ed Wood because of an interview I heard with Bela Lugosi Jr., who did not like the romanticization of their relationship. He saw Ed Wood as a parasite
very exploitative.
Who was taking advantage of his father, who was addicted to drugs and could not do anything better, and forcing him to be in some of the worst movies ever.
Yeah, really tarnishing his reputation.
And it wasn't about this sort of loving mentor relationship between this aging star and this hotshot young filmmaker. It was about a parasite who was taking advantage of somebody who was dying.
Yeah.
And it's hard to think about that and watch Ed Wood anymore. For years, however, this really was a terrific watch. And
it's still a good movie.
And a lot of people are really deeply inspired by it. And I think it's still worth seeing because Ed Wood is a fascinating character. And it is Tim Burton finally doing something a little bit different. He's trying to turn a biography and making it look like one of Ed Wood's own movies.
True, and I think he does a masterful job of that. The idea of the biopic as reality is something I struggle with because on one hand, for most people, they're not going to read a biography of Ed Wood. The movie is what they get. Yeah. And even if they know to take it with a grain of salt, they just get the impression of the film, and the film is very celebratory of, at the very least, his gumption. So if you misrepresent it, that can really suck. On the other hand, people's lives aren't, objective fact. It is perception. And sometimes the way other people view them, be they with rose-colored glasses or with scorn, can be valid as well. It's not as egregious as something as, say, Amadeus, which basically slanders Salieri. It's still a brilliant story, but it slanders Salieri. So I'm conflicted by that because on one hand I think Ed Wood's a very good movie, and certainly that is someone's perception, at least after the fact of it, and that is very genuine. But anyway, moving on. His next big movie, and this is so Ed Wood was a bomb.
Yeah, no one cared about it.
Critically acclaimed, but no one gave a shit. And so he decided to do a big one. And so his big one was Mars Attacks.
Okay, I adore Mars Attacks. No one else does. Because in order to enjoy Mars Attacks, you have to tap into the part of you that is a really violent 11-year-old boy that wants to murder people with ray guns.
The part of you that wants to set your action figures on fire.
The sympathetic characters are the Martians.
in Edward Scissorhands or Frankenweenie, Tim Burton gets pretty judgy about, like, just sort of civilized humanity.
In this one, he gets to murder civilized humanity.
In this one, he paints a portrait of humanity in which basically everyone except Lucas Haas and Natalie Portman is fucking terrible. And Annette Bening and...
No, even Annette Bening is kind of this new agey weirdo who doesn't trust anybody.
But she's not malignant.
Yeah, the survivors in this movie.
Yeah, anyone who survives in this movie.
Lucas Haas and Natalie Portman. And Lucas Haas, his big message at the end is, well, everything's got torn down, so I guess we got to rebuild. I think we should make teepees.
Yeah. Oh, Tom Jones gets off
and Tom Jones playing himself.
Jim Brown gets off okay, but like for the most part, society is terrible and the Martians are here to cull the herd. So Martians show up and they're big. They look like the monsters from This Island Earth, but shrunk down.
Yeah, it's Invasion of the Saucer Men.
Yeah. So... And they arrive, and everyone thinks, "Oh, we're not gonna fuck this up like we do in the movies. We're just gonna make sure it's very, very peaceful, very, very great." The Martians kill everybody and leave, and then humanity's just like, "Well, maybe it was a misunderstanding.
Let's try again." So they invite them into Congress, and they just murder Congress.
It's insane. It's so malevolent. It's an insanely expensive, mean-spirited, dark comedy. And it came out a couple of months after Independence Day.
So it plays like a satire of Independence Day.
And people wanted... I mean, I think it made money, but like people were not into it.
No, it was not beloved. It did not make a lot of money. People were confused as to why so many people, like big stars, would agree to be in this. Because Annette Bening, Michael J. Fox,
Jack Nicholson plays two roles.
Jack Nicholson has two parts. He plays the president. He wanted to play... He wanted to play more. In fact, because Tim Burton gave the script to Jack Nicholson. He's like, "Hey, I'm making this thing. It's going to be mean-spirited and dumb. I'd like you to play a role. Pick one. You're Jack Nicholson. Pick whatever role you like." And he called him up later. He's like, "Hey, did you choose a role?" Is like, Jack Nicholson, "Yeah, I want to play all of these roles." And I bet... had they the time and the technology, this would have been a film starring no one but Jack Nicholson.
This is Jack Nicholson trying to do Peter Sellers and Dr. Strangelove. This is Tim Burton's Dr. Strangelove. Because humanity sucks and deserves to blow up.
Yeah.
Like it's a very immature movie.
It's his least mature film, and I think that's its strength. There's no emotional core to this. Just let's be violent and destroy everything. It's wonderfully punk.
I agree. I have no actual problem with this movie. I think everyone kind of wanted another like big actiony thing. And again, this was Tim Burton. He'd done Batman. People still kind of associated him with he could do action. He had no interest. He wanted to blow up the world, and he did. And he had a lot of fun. Like my favorite, just the montage, because like in Independence Day, there's a montage of the aliens blowing stuff up, and it's big and huge and tragic and enormous. And when the Martians are doing it, they're having fun. Like when they bowl down the heads,
they're bowling down the Easter Island heads. They're recarving Mount Rushmore. Yeah, they're taking pictures of themselves in front of, like, trying to get the framing just right on the flaming Taj Mahal.
It's so great. 3 years later, Tim Burton returned. And in great form.
Well, he returned, but at this point, the bloom was off the rose with Tim Burton.
People had started to notice that he had a very particular pattern, and he had become a joke.
He had a particular pattern, and he started to sort of throw things up, and I think only for a little while here, he was only doing the projects he wanted to do. And he had
the freedom for a bit.
He had a little bit more freedom, even though Mars Attacks wasn't a hit, even though Ed Wood was still acclaimed, so it was, still getting
won 2 Oscars, so he had some clout.
What does he want to do? He wants to make a Hammer horror film. So he makes Sleepy Hollow in 1999, which was released after Halloween. Big bonehead mistake on the studio's part. But he got to work with Christopher Lee, and Johnny Depp played Ichabod Crane, who goes to Sleepy Hollow, which is in New York.
Oh, and it's a great fucking cast. Like Christina Ricci's in this, Miranda Richardson, Michael Gambon, Casper Van Dien.
Casper Van Dien, when he was still a quantity. Ray Park played the Headless Horseman.
Brilliant. Ray Park, and when he has a head, Christopher
Walken.
So the idea of Sleepy Hollow. Okay, if you don't know the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, read it. There's also a great Disney animated short, but it's a folk story of
Washington Irving.
Yeah, Washington Irving wrote this great story about a cowardly school teacher who moved to a small town where there's a story of a headless horseman, and he gets terrified by what may or may not be the actual headless horseman. In Tim Burton's world, he decided, or the screenwriters decided, and Tim Burton brought it to life, we're going to take the idea of the Headless Horseman and we're going to treat it like almost a giallo, like a slasher movie where he keeps killing people and no one knows why. Johnny Depp plays a detective who wants to use scientific detection techniques in order to find out who committed crimes. So everyone sees that as a huge annoyance, and it's way too much effort, and it's not worth it. And so he is given the assignment: you find out who's killing all these people in Sleepy Hollow, and we'll cut you some, and we'll take it under advisement. So he goes to this town, and he discovers that, despite all of his scientific know-how, the supernatural is real, and the Headless Horseman is really coming for him. And the action is fantastic because it's Ray Park, and the style of it is perfect.
I believe Emmanuel Lubezki is the cinematographer on this one, and it's maybe his best work. There's every single frame is misty and muddy and terrifying. The colors are all muted until someone bleeds. Yeah,
when it's red, it pops.
And he repeats this aesthetic with Sweeney Todd, and it works in both cases. But there's a scene where he's doing an autopsy, and he hits like a vein, and some blood squirts on his face, and it's the most shocking scene in the movie, where people are getting their heads chopped off.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful shot where somebody's standing on the ramparts waiting for the Headless Horseman to show up, and they're looking at the edge of town. They see the woods at the edge of town, and there's a line of torches kind of just barely lighting things, so you can barely see the trees, and almost without noticing, you see little tendrils of mist reach out of the woods and snuff out the torches one by one. It's terrifying.
Cool. Yeah. It's visually brilliant. It is intentionally evoking Hammer horror films and bringing them into a very modern sensibility. There's one decision that was made. I don't know who made it. It feels like a Johnny Depp decision, but it really makes Sleepy Hollow more than just an exercise in style. It makes it really special. Ichabod Crane is a fucking coward.
Yeah.
He's not just a nerd.
He doesn't have a head. Yeah.
Like, he sees the Headless Horseman, and he just collapses into a heap. He's got like a young squire, like his parents have been killed by the Headless Horseman, and so he's got nothing to do but follow Johnny Depp around.
And when he's got bad skin. He looks really unhealthy, that kid.
And when they go into a mysterious cave to check out and see if the Headless Horseman is there, Johnny Depp uses the kid as a human shield. He's a coward. It's really funny. My only problem with this movie, and it's the only problem I have with it. Otherwise, I think it's
the script.
The script, okay. The script is fine until
the story is kind of goes off the
when
rails.
The true villain in Sleepy Hollow is revealed, and they have a big, long villain monologue about their plan and everything they were doing. Blah blah blah.
Turns out the Van Garrett was really a Van Tassel, but the Van Tassels were Van Garrett. It's like why do they
with the poisons with the vessel with the pestle?
Why are they both Van? I can't figure out.
It's needlessly complicated. It could have been half as complicated. It's just a monologue. We don't need most of this. It just throws exposition at you in the second to last scene. It's annoying.
Also, Christina Ricci probably gives one of the worst performances of her career in this one.
She does what the movie asks of her. I think she's okay. At that point, Tim Burton's kind of back on top. People love him again. Sleepy Hollow was a hit. And he ends up remaking one of the greatest science fiction movies ever made. Planet of the Apes.
Nobody likes this movie.
No one does.
Fans of makeup and costuming are fans of this movie.
Okay.
Because the makeup and the costumes haven't really been much better.
No, this is some of the best movie makeup ever. And it is fucking absurd that this was not nominated for Best Makeup at the Academy Awards. Yeah. I have a theory that everyone who was nominating in that category assumed everyone else was going to nominate Planet of the Apes, and so no one nominated Planet of the Apes. It's insane. The makeup is perfect. It's great. The movie, not so much. Well,
you look at the structure of it. It's completely different from the original. Franklin J. Schaffner directed the original, and Tim Burton changed the premise. It's about a brave, boring white hero who chases a chimp through a space hole and winds up on a planet of the apes. And where in the original Planet of the Apes, they were mute creatures. Humans were mute creatures, and the apes were the ones who were intelligent and could speak. In this one, the humans can speak, and they're rounded up like slaves, and so there's this really awkward slavery metaphor which doesn't work.
What's weird? Paul Giamatti plays the same character in this that he does in 12 Years a Slave.
You're right.
He plays him the same way.
He plays the
it's
slave
really
driver.
weird. Yeah.
Only in this one, he's an orangutan.
I appreciate that they're trying to make this a different kind of allegory because at the time Planet of the Apes came out, we were still in Inherit the Wind territory where, like, the idea of evolution was still seen, and frankly, it still is to some people, but it was still seen as somewhat, potentially controversial against God's plan, whatever you want to call it. So that was a lot of what the original Planet of the Apes was about. Here, he's not just making a racial allegory, and it's a clumsy one, but he's really making it. He's also saying that our treatment of animals, the way we put them in zoos, the way we make them, do tricks, that is just as horrific as the way we've treated many people throughout history. It's really clumsy about it.
It's incredibly clumsy about it. It barely even reads. He's so high on the design and the genre that you're losing anything that the script has to say. The casting is weird.
Yeah,
Estella Warren is so
lost.
like. The cave woman who can't balance on rocks and wears a lot of lip gloss. That's believable.
Yeah,
and Mark Wahlberg as the lead character is totally miscast.
Is he?
He is, because if you look at the beginning scenes where he's in sort of the white outfit and you listen to the dialogue, he's trying to make Forbidden Planet. He's trying to make This Island Earth. He's trying to make something a little bit square and corny.
Yes.
And Mark Wahlberg isn't playing that. He's either he's misdirected or he just doesn't know how to play that kind of role.
I have a theory. I know a lot of people feel like Planet of the Apes is kind of a betrayal of Tim Burton's typical style. Tim Burton typically makes homages to movies in the 1920s, the 1950s, and I think that's what he did here, but he made an homage to movies people don't like. He made an homage to stuff like Teenage Caveman.
Yeah.
He made an homage to stuff like This Island Earth, which is very phony, in which rock-headed, completely miscast actors who aren't acting well blunder into a situation, fuck everything up through their weird patriarchal manliness, and then somehow get treated like the savior at the end. There's an element of that I see here, and I appreciate what he's going for. It doesn't work.
That's what he's trying to do, and had he were he successful with it, it probably would have been an okay film. As it stands, just turn the sound off. Look at all the wonderful. I guess you can leave the music on if there's a music only track. Just don't ignore all the dialogue.
The action sucks. Like the only things that are great besides the makeup, which is astounding. Tim Roth is a great villain. General Thade is really great villain.
Helena Bonham Carter as a chimpanzee with the Rachel.
That was the hair is weird, but she also gives a really good performance. Like those are two really good performances. They're an oasis in this otherwise misguided movie.
All of the ape performers, all of the actors who play ape characters, also went to like really extensive movement classes. So not only are they dressed well and they have the amazing makeup, they move like apes. It's amazing to behold. Just visually, it's astounding. As a film, it kind of sucks.
So Tim Burton, after basically bombing this, like this was, I think it ended up making a profit, but not much. It was not a hit. The ending made no sense whatsoever.
He needed another prestige picture.
So he went to a film called Big Fish. Big Fish is his weepiest weepy that ever weepied. He's generally sentimental when he gets to be. Yeah.
This is him just on sentimentality overdrive.
And in a way it works.
It'll make you cry.
Like it's a very effective. It's manipulative, but it's very effective. It stars Billy Crudup as a man whose father is dying. His father's played by Albert Finney, right? And his father told him a whole bunch of ridiculous tall tales
about his own life. Yeah,
and we're not. Here's the funny thing was, I actually really connected with this film initially because my dad told me a bunch of whoppers as well, but his were vaguely plausible. So in Big Fish, he's like, "Oh yeah, I ran away and joined the circus, and the ringleader was a wolf man." What? The fuck are you talking about? Like they're all hugely stupid stories like this.
So we hear him tell these tall tales, and of course it's like hugely exaggerated in Tim Burton land when he tells the tales, and
Yeah, and even at this age, even when
Ewan
his son's an
McGregor
adult, he refuses to change the narrative.
Ewan McGregor, plays the young version of Albert Finney, and he's on his deathbed, and Billy Crudup says, "Now that you're dying, I need the truth," and he tells the same stories again.
Yeah,
and that really pisses him off. And of course, over the course of all of these tales, Billy Crudup comes to realize that fiction is more valuable than the truth, and you can use that message as a wonderful metaphor for what cinema does. And I think that's why a lot of critics responded really powerfully to something like Big Fish.
I haven't revisited this one in a while, partially because I don't want to cry that hard. Because again, Albert Finney does remind me of my dad, and my dad passed away 4 or 5 years ago now, and it would kill me. So I'm going off of memory on this one. I'll freely admit to that. My memory is intensely emotionally effective, maybe a little too broad for its own good. I think it might have been more effective if Tim Burton had actually reined in some of the fanciful elements a little. Because I start getting distracted by just how absurd the stories are, as opposed to appreciating how I'm supposed to be connecting with them. But on a purely structural level, I think it's a really, really great idea for a story. I think it's very beautifully acted, and it's nice. It's nice.
It's wonderfully. I don't mind it. I know people have been turning against Big Fish in recent years, which is a little odd to me. But
people don't like sentimentality.
I guess so.
After this, he went back to the corporate well.
And it was here where Tim Burton started, was assigned projects, and that's actually happened several films back, but.
He was basically like, "Hey, Burtonize this."
The people took existing properties that would mesh well with the Burton master aesthetic and just put them together and threw them in theaters. Tim Burton has famously said that he can't tell the difference between a good script and a bad script.
He just connects with it, or he doesn't.
He reads them and he's like, "Yeah, I can make this. I can put these visuals on it, and what's it about? I don't know. I just made it."
If he happens to key into something he's passionate about, it comes out great. If not, you get Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
He's eloquent about his interests, but when it's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it's pretty bad.
I don't hate this movie the way some people do. I'm a huge fan of the Gene Wilder version, which also takes huge liberties with the book. I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, they changed the ending so that at the end Charlie rejects Willy Wonka's offer, and we had to deal with his dad who's a dentist." Also, all of that stuff is dumb.
The actor who plays Charlie in the Gene Wilder version is just toast. He's just so boring.
It's interesting to me because Charlie in the books disappears once you get to that shot.
It's true, and he kind of does. And here he's played by a young actor, Freddie Highmore, who is also boring as toast.
He ended up being a really good actor, but he's not good in this movie. But I think the real issue is...
It's kind of weird that the one called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is more about Charlie, and the one called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is more about Willy Wonka.
It's really weird. The original one was, they changed the title because at the time it was in the Vietnam War, and Charlie had a different cultural connotation. But, Can
you imagine a really gritty war film called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and it's all ironic?
It'd be weird. The idea behind... The overarching idea, why we're remaking it, what's our new take on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, is that Willy Wonka is Michael Jackson at the Neverland Ranch. He's reclusive, childlike, eccentric.
Well, and there's throwbacks here to Pee-wee. In interviews, Johnny Depp said that his performance was inspired partly by Michael Jackson and partly by Carol Channing. He tried to make him just this weird... And this was when Johnny Depp was moving into the I'm going to wear a funny hat phase of his acting career. He stopped delving into real character work and just wanted to do weird stuff for the sake of it.
Yeah, which I guess is not the end of the world.
Prerogative as a professional.
It's not as interesting to us, but all right. Tim Burton really connects with Willy Wonka. The problem is there are all these other characters.
It's a bunch of kids,
and he just doesn't seem that interested in most of them.
Even as he murders them, there's not that kind of gleeful darkness like in Mars Attacks.
It's the original story by Roald Dahl is basically just a Grimm's fairy tale about here are all these traits that I hate about kids, and they're gonna die ironically, and then we'll show them at the end that they're alive, but we know what I meant. And
can't murder children in your book. Why not? Dickens did it. Dickens didn't really murder them off. He murdered the villains. Yeah. Okay, fine.
But listen, this one's a mess. It adds a whole bunch of it puts a hat on a hat on a hat. It just makes a simple story unnecessarily weirdly complicated.
The music is fun. An Indian actor named Deep Roy played
all the Oompa Loompas. He's fun. He's fun. I like him a lot. I like some of the musical numbers. I like because the original Willy Wonka, they couldn't do the squirrel scene from the books because it was just too complicated, so they changed that to the goose that laid the golden eggs, which was also a great scene and served the same function. I liked seeing the squirrel scene finally play out. That was kind of fun. I was a huge Roald Dahl fan as a kid, so that was neat.
They had to update Mike TV because now he's a video game freak.
I'm fine with it.
That's fine.
That doesn't bother me at all. There's stuff I like about it, but it's not a complete wash, but it's not good.
It's also Tim Burton taking his aesthetic into the wrong place. This was when CGI started to invade his universe. He did mostly practical effects up to this point, and the CGI allowed him to play with the color palette, and the color palette is ugly as sin in this movie.
It looks like a jar of candy from different companies.
It's all melting together. The color scheme is it's really shadowy, and
the fantasy of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is. It's a chocolate factory.
Yeah, and this chocolate factory
you want to go to.
This chocolate factory looks like a nightmare in this one.
The candy room where everything is edible looks gross. It doesn't work. It's not a good movie. It's one of his worst. That same year, he came out with a movie that you and I are definitely split on.
Because I like Corpse Bride a lot.
I want to like Corpse Bride a lot.
I feel like well, this is another one that he wrote, and this is based on his own imagination. And I feel when he writes and plays to his own interests, that's when he's working strongest. And Corpse Bride, it's a black and white animated film that turns color when you go to the world of the dead. And again, the death and outsiders are far more interesting to him. The tragic character, the Corpse Bride herself, voiced by Helena Bonham Carter, is the one with the tragic romantic story who feels like she's found something that can fulfill her, and by the end of the film she learns how to let go. And how does someone let go into their romantic lives? They are a corpse that dissolves into butterflies. That's like something straight out of Keats. It's like it's a poem. It's really this beautiful tragic story about this bride who finds what she wants and a square who finds what he wants.
Now the square is played by Johnny Depp, and he's basically born without a personality. He's he's nice, but he's bland as bland can possibly be.
He's fearful and he can't please anybody.
And like his world, his black and white world isn't just black and white. It's like devoid of production design. Like it's just empty rooms. Like it's really
big gigantic cavernous spaces.
And he's gonna get married to this woman he's not really met. They only had like a brief moment together, and they're sweet, and we're supposed to be rooting for them.
But they can make music together. That's their one outlet.
That's great. And then he ends up.
That's the point. They can make music together.
While he's practicing his marriage proposal, he puts the ring on a twig, not realizing it's a desiccated hand.
Skeleton.
And he has just asked this corpse to marry him, and she says yes. And now it's too awkward to say, I didn't mean that, and now he's stuck. And
now he's stuck in the land of the dead.
I really like the premise. I love the story in general. Like all the bullet points are really great and beautiful and sweet. You're right. On that level, it's fantastic. Problem is, the stuff that's supposed to be super boring is super boring. Also, there are these weird technical problems that bother me with it. Like, Danny Elfman, it's not really a full musical, but there are musical numbers in it. And whenever people sing, you can barely make out the words. One of Danny Elfman's great skills as a songwriter was his incredibly clever lyrics. And yeah, they get lost. They're not articulated well. Like, you can't hear the origin of the Corpse Bride. It's actually really bad filmmaking. I don't care.
I like the Bone Jangles song fine.
I like it in a vacuum, but like it doesn't work. I don't connect with this film the way I want to. Because I think it's ultimately he made the divide too big. I think he made the boring stuff too boring, and the frantic stuff just it's so much more interesting. I resent the film for showing me anything else.
One of the weird technical things that does bug me about this film is they had to redesign the dolls. Like the little maquettes they use to animate. In The Nightmare Before Christmas and in most stop motion, they'll have to replace the character's entire head or a big portion of their face to move the mouth or to move the eyes. And in this one, they invented dolls that have movable mouths and faces. And could actually blink their own eyes, which streamlined the process a lot. They put a little, I've seen the production video, and they put a little key in the back of their head to like move their jaws and their cheeks. The problem with that sort of thing is that there's a lot less variety of movement. Their faces can only move so much, so the characters are, they're a lot less expressive than they were in The Nightmare Before Christmas. The Nightmare Before Christmas is wild, and everything moves, and everything's crazy and all over the place, and it took like 4 years to make. This one took a year to make, and the characters don't move as much.
Eventually we would get into, like, again, as we said, Paranorman territory, Coraline territory, where they would figure out that process a little better, and you could do it more quickly and have that personality. But this is this weird in the middle moment.
So I like do like the sort of spare visuals. It does feel very slight, but it does feel very, very Tim Burton.
He followed this up 2 years later with Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, which it's based on
a Sondheim opera.
About a man who was betrayed. And he
by a judge.
And he returns many years later to exact his revenge, and he decides he will become a barber. He was always a barber. He's going to come back, be a great barber under a new name, and he kills people. And in order to get rid of the corpse, he has teamed up with the woman who owns the meat pie shop underneath him.
The worst pies in London.
Yes.
Because you don't know what kind of meat you're going to get, but where can you find meat while walking around the streets of London?
And it's really gross, and it's really tragic.
But again, this is assigning the Burton aesthetic to a pre-existing property that it would fit with. And
but this one, it really fits. It makes a lot of sense.
It really fits. The singing is not as good as it could be because they let the actors do the singing, and they're not all necessarily great singers.
Some are better than others.
Alan Rickman should not sing. I'm sorry.
It was not his wheelhouse.
Johnny Depp and Alan Rickman sing a duet, and it's kind of painful to listen to. The story is great. The
Johnny
visuals
Depp was nominated for Best Actor for this, and man, not with that singing voice.
Like he got to act and like play this wonderful monstrous character while singing.
He's doing it really well, but like because
he picks out one of his straight razors and says, "At last, my arm is complete." And there's a lot of really wonderful moments. The music is fine if you're a Sondheim fan. It's a little dissonant, and there's not a lot of that's really hummable in Sweeney Todd.
It's gorgeous production design. It looks great. It feels to me, though, partly because you want to cast big actors because it's a movie, and big actors generally can't sing very well right now. It's like you watch the newer version of Les Miserables, and Anne Hathaway can sing. Hugh Jackman,
she can sing that one number anyway.
Well, that's the only thing she's asked to sing, so she's great, and that's why she won that Oscar. She can sing. Hugh Jackman can get away with it.
He can sing.
He can sing, but I'm not sure it's necessarily
this isn't good material for him. But
it feels like he's slightly off for it. But as far as actors who could pull this off, who are big stars, he's the only one I can think of. Russell Crowe. Oh my fucking god. Like, he kills the movie. It's my favorite. It's maybe my favorite character in fiction.
Is Javert.
Javert is maybe my favorite character in all of fiction. And Russell Crowe is a good casting for it if you don't make him have to sing.
Well, Russell Crowe would have been good. I mean, Jeffrey Rush was really good in that late 90s.
He was, actually. It's not a great movie, but he's really good in it. Sweeney Todd feels like a handsome production, but maybe a somewhat dispassionate one. It's good. I don't love it. It's not Burton's best, but it's good.
I actually rewatched this one in preparation for this episode and found that it's actually a lot richer than I remember. There's a relationship that the Helena Bonham Carter character has with a young boy who they've fallen in league with. And there's a really wonderful number near the end where the boy has found out that they're murdering people, and he doesn't know that she's in on it. And so he sings a number that he's going to protect her, and she sings it back in counterpoint.
That's such a great
how
bit.
They're going to protect one another, and they both realize there's during the song that they both realize they're talking about Sweeney Todd, and they have to get away from this monster. And of course, he murders everybody. It's actually a really wonderful, kind of emotionally rich moment that kind of got me a little bit. So it's actually a better film that I recall. It was one of those films that was released as a prestige picture at the end of the year. I think it came out on Christmas Day.
Big Oscar contender.
It's a big Oscar contender. It was nominated for a couple Oscars. Tim Burton still hasn't won one.
He's only been nominated for animated feature.
For Corpse Bride.
No, Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie.
That's right, and for Frankenweenie as well. And as has happened with, and this would happen with Tim Burton again, when you release it at the end of the year as this gigantic prestige picture, it's 8th on everybody's list. Nobody remembers the Tim Burton film because it's swallowed up by other higher profile prestige films. And it's because his films are too weird to play as prestige.
Yeah.
So stop doing that.
I guess they figured that the Stephen Sondheim thing would kind of grandfather him in.
Maybe so. No.
I would love to see like what Tim Burton could do with like Shakespeare.
Like
Titus Andronicus is done. Like, I can't imagine him doing anything too different from Julie Taymor.
Julie Taymor's version is bloody perfect,
But
too.
can you imagine, like, Tim Burton's Macbeth? Or something? I'm sorry, Julie Taymor's The Tempest is not unassailable. He could do his own The Tempest, and I wouldn't be mad. Like, that'd be kind of cool.
I'd love to see him do A Winter's Tale. Be a good one.
He followed up Sweeney Todd 3 years later with Alice in Wonderland.
This is his worst movie.
I think there's a really good argument to be made. This is his worst movie.
And yes, I've seen Dark Shadows.
We'll talk about Dark Shadows.
We're about to talk about Dark Shadows. Alice in Wonderland, and it also started a really distressing trend because it was too successful for its own good.
It made $1 billion.
It was all CGI, and with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, everything is just ugly and muddy and hazy.
And on top of it all, it was 3D, so when you're in the theater watching it, all the color gets washed out because it's just too dim.
I saw a 2D screening, so I was lucky, so I can make some stuff out.
Dim.
It's dim. The lead character is not interestingly played. The Mad Hatter is not interestingly played.
And they
the
made
story is not that.
Yeah,
the story's not all that interesting unto itself. It's a good idea, I suppose. Making a sequel, it's like Return to Oz, the movie. The movie Return to Oz.
Return to Oz is great. So Return to Wonderland makes sense.
And if they had called it Return to Wonderland, I think it may have gotten a little bit more traction. But they were trying to sell it as kind of this remake, and they just called it Alice in Wonderland. It has nothing to do with Lewis Carroll at all anymore.
Well,
it's about an older Alice who's on the cusp of marrying. She goes back into this fantasy world where there's a war happening, and this was during a trend when young.
It's Hook.
It's Hook. There you go.
Hook. She goes back because she doesn't remember it. Everyone remembers her. Like, oh, this is Alice. Everyone loves Alice. Alice is going to save us. Alice is prophesied, blah, 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 and she doesn't remember.
And indeed, they try to walk back that it was called Wonderland. They say, no, this is Underland.
Like, fuck you. Who cares?
Shut up.
That's what you're doing? Come on.
There was this trend, I guess it's still going on, where to have like a plucky young heroine, you have to make her a murdering warrior, and you put a sword or a bow and arrow in her hands.
Yeah, and it's really forced here. I appreciate... Here's what I'm going to say. Okay, first off, I love Disney's original Alice in Wonderland. I think it is. I think it is wonderfully weird. I think, obviously they cherry pick stuff, but like what they put in there is actually quite impressive. Like, they put the Walrus and the Carpenter in there. That's a really dark story. Like,
it's been a while since I've seen it. I remember being disappointed at how not weird it was.
It's weird for for the time.
Okay,
it's weird for what they could get away with. But yeah, I've read the book Alice in Wonderland, and it's hilarious, and it's very intelligent, and it's about sort of nonsense. It's about how
I feel like we haven't had that in film yet, like to really get what Lewis Carroll was doing.
Lewis Carroll was basically making fun of new math, and he was basically saying like everything that people say makes sense now is actually total nonsense, and that's a level of wit and intelligence that is completely absent from this Alice in Wonderland, and they make the most obvious version of it, and it's really frustrating that it comes from Disney, who are typically tend to be a little bit more particular about the way that their brands are handled, and this is just a thudding bore. Now, I do appreciate that, unlike, say, Bill Condon's Beauty and the Beast remake, which everyone loved,
and is awful,
is terrible, in our opinion. The thing was, Bill Condon didn't have a new take on the material. There's literally no reason to watch his version over the animated version. It's just the same thing, only longer, and they added stuff so that the story doesn't make sense. That's it. And also the singing isn't as good. That's it. Here, they have a take. There is an interpretation here where the idea is we're going to take Alice, a character who is typically portrayed as befuddled and easily misled, and we're going to create a story in which she actually
has some agency.
It's almost like a coming of age story for her now, a proper one. And so she actually overcomes what is expected of her and proves that she's intelligent and capable. And we see, and the sequel is worse, but like it's prettier, but it's worse.
They're equal, but yeah.
But like that one, she's like an awesome pirate queen in the real world. And like, I appreciate you want to make her like a cool feminist icon. I appreciate that. That's not a bad idea in and of itself. It's really poorly done. The script is just thuds along. Couple of like the smaller performances like take root. I think Anne Hathaway is really fun in this.
I didn't like her 2 scenes.
Yeah, she's got 2 scenes, but they're good scenes. I think Stephen Fry as the Cheshire Cat is really funny. I hate the way that they handled the Mad Hatter just as a character. Like, ignore Johnny Depp's bullshit, but like, he's not important.
Yeah.
He never was important. He was a side character. He was mad. That's about it.
And then he became... And it was the pivot point of the whole story in the sequel.
Oh my god! Like the whole thing is like, oh, you have to come back for the Cheshire for the Mad Hatter. Yes, he was my one true friend. You barely talk to him.
He's not like the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz.
Fuck
yeah,
you.
go away.
Like, I hate it so much.
And it launched a trend of a bunch of movies that I kind of hate most of them. Like, I like Branagh's Cinderella.
That actually did some really good things with the story. Like,
yeah,
Cinderella is maybe the apex of this whole trend.
Yeah, I like
live action Disney trend.
I like parts of Pete's Dragon.
I really like Pete's Dragon.
I'm one of the people who does not like The Jungle Book.
Jungle Book has grown on me over time as I've revisited the animated one, and I forgot just how shabby it was.
That's kind of the charm of that movie. It is how shabby it is.
It is the charm of it. Like, Jon Favreau found the thread. I still think he went way too nuts with like the action in the climax. I don't care. I think it gets stupid. But I've really grown to like Jon Favreau's animated Jungle Book.
Right.
And it's not live action. There's only one live action component in the whole movie. Everything else is animated. It's an animated movie.
It's an animated movie. You can't call it a live action remake. It's just a remake.
Yeah.
CGI remake.
I'm calling it now.
But yeah, Maleficent was really terrible.
That's another one where I appreciate how nuts they went with it. They went nuts.
And Tim Burton was supposed to do Maleficent at one point, or there are at least rumors.
It would have been a better looking movie, that's for sure. Like, that's not the one where it's dim.
But all he did was Alice in Wonderland, so we kind of saw what he was going to do with it.
Maybe, but his next movie is a movie a lot of people hate, and Witney and I don't.
And I think we're the only ones.
It's called Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows was a very...
Again, Tim Burton master aesthetic on pre-existing
material. But the difference is that Dark Shadows doesn't have much of a cultural cachet anymore.
In America.
Or just anymore. Really? Dark Shadows was a daily soap opera. But unlike most daily soap operas, like As the World Turns or General Hospital, it was a gothic soap opera, which eventually had like monsters and stuff in it. Like one of the main characters was a vampire after like the 112th episode. It took a while to find that.
They got a you can get a box set of the complete run of Dark Shadows, and it's like 52 DVDs. Yeah. It's really crazy.
It's absolutely insane.
And a lot of people really attached themselves to Dark Shadows because they were on such a hastened production schedule that it's like they made all kinds of production mistakes. Like, you can see like beer cans on the set, and the sound really sucks, and people screw up their lines, but they just have to keep on going. It's like one of the sloppiest made TV shows.
It was daily television. It was the best they had at the time. They were it's a mess, but it was a cult favorite, and so they decided they've been talking for a while about doing like a movie version, and they settled on a version written by Seth Grahame-Smith, who did like Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters, or one of those fucking things. He did Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters is a real thing. I don't think Seth Grahame-Smith actually did that one.
It's a different author, but yeah.
And what they did, and the reason I think a lot of people did not connect with this, was they made a rather merciless monster lampoon of daytime soap opera storytelling.
And it's kind of brilliant in doing that.
And the problem is, when you satirize, especially cleverly and particularly, an art form that is no longer in favor, people won't pick up on what you're doing.
There's a scene in this movie, it's about a third of the way through, where Barnabas Collins, the vampire, played by Johnny Depp, who looks like a vampire. He's pale, and
they gave him like
makeup. And they gave him and they gave him like extended, like extra long fingers, which is really strange.
He's half Nosferatu.
He's half Nosferatu, and he has a conversation with Michelle Pfeiffer, who is swinging for the walls, and God bless her.
She's great.
And they walk into a room, and they're just sort of, the blocking in the scene is so awkward, and the camera is moving in such strange ways, and you can tell that they're putting microphones on their shoes as they walk through this hardwood floors. You can tell they're spoofing the way soap operas are made, and the way they're blocked, and the way people read these lines, and to people who aren't picking up on that, it's just going to read like a really badly made scene, but it was really done rather cleverly.
It's kind of perfect. Ava Green is gone full Joan Collins in this, and she's amazing.
She and Johnny Depp have a sex scene that literally flies into the ceiling.
It's so fun. I like this movie a lot. It's a movie that's made for a very particular audience. If you remember something like,
and it looks terrific. I love the design.
It's a great looking movie. Like if something like Peyton Reed, before he did the Ant-Man movies, he directed a movie called Down with Love. Down with Love is a really funny movie if you know Rock Hudson and Doris Day movies. Because it's a very merciless satire of a very particular kind of storytelling, which died in the early 60s. If you know that, Down with Love is a masterpiece. If you don't know what the fuck to do with it. So if you didn't watch a lot of daytime soap operas, Dark Shadows probably won't do it for you. If you did, it still might not do it for you. I'm not going to claim it's perfection, but I get what it's doing, and I like what it's doing. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'm going to go to bat for this one. I think it's his most underrated movie. I think it's
that's for sure.
Batman Returns has some defenders. This has none.
I think I would like to encourage our listeners to watch it again and see if you can see what we're seeing in this thing.
Because like when you know like what angle you're supposed to watch something from, it can completely unlock it. If you don't know what to make of something, and then someone says, "Actually, it's a parable for the Vietnam War," you're like, "Oh my god, I get aliens now!" Like, you know, like there's more to it, and sometimes you just have to just say, "Oh, I was expecting one thing, and I got something else."
Yeah,
and as a result, I thought it was bad, but actually it wasn't trying to do that at all. And this was sold, this had character posters, this was sold as like a big broad fish out of water comedy, and it had elements of that. It did. Some of them are funnier than others. It's not that. This is like Soap Dish. Like, this is a very different vibe. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
After this, actually the same year, Tim Burton made one of his better movies, Frankenweenie.
He expanded his short into a feature-length film, and
stop motion again.
Stop motion, same sort of basic design. This one's just straight up black and white at this point, like it's shot on black and white. And it's the same story. Young boy loses his beloved dog, brings it back, but this is much more of a parable of the strengths of science. And its place in the modern world, and how it is still seen as suspect. It's not necessarily a science versus religion thing. There's no religious characters in the movie, but it is about
an anti-science streak.
I think it is addressing kind of an anti-science, anti-intellectual bent in the modern world. It feels like it takes place in the 1950s, but I think it's also very modern. The character designs are terrific. I love the Igor character.
He's fun. I like the way that, because Frankenweenie as like a half-hour short, it's kind of perfect. Like, it doesn't really need any more than that. And oftentimes when you adapt a short film into a feature, you end up just padding the sucker. That's it. Here, he actually found a really organic way to do it, partly by just sort of expanding on Frankenstein's journey to make Frankenweenie and adding a little bit more texture with, science bad, blah. What I like is that over time we see that other kids decide to use the technology to bring their pets back to life.
And the only stakes is that they want to win a science fair.
Yeah. But like it ultimately ends up with all of these kids have all of these animals that only they love and are wreaking havoc, and everyone else is terrified. But they're just like, Mittens, no.
Although in this weird magical twist, because they're using science for the wrong reasons, their pets turn into like horrific monsters.
Yeah, but
I like that one of the rivals sounds like a kid Boris Karloff.
Oh, yeah.
Like, rise, Colossus, from your tomb. That's really terrific.
This is a sweet movie, and it's one of the I think
twee like crazy.
It is, but I think it earns it. And I think what's interesting is that Burton's aesthetic, and it's the same basic aesthetic he's always had. It felt adolescent, and then it felt very mature. And now, same aesthetic, but now it feels more childlike. And I feel like the kind of stuff that Tim Burton loves is the kind of stuff you'll see on Saturday mornings now. Like, Gravity Falls is something that Tim Burton would have watched as a kid and loved. And I think it fits in this particular kids movie. It's a little ghoulish. It's a little dark. It's a perfect slumber party Halloween movie.
Yeah. This came out the same year as... I think the same year as Paranorman and Hotel Transylvania, so that was a good year.
Was it Hotel Transylvania the same year as well? My God.
Yeah, it was a good year for kids horror.
Yeah, I think Paranorman has a bit more of an edge.
That's for sure.
So I think if I had to pick between the two, I might pick Paranorman, but I don't see why we have to. Yeah, it was the same year.
No, I super dig Paranorman.
Yeah, I think all of those are really, really great, like horror-themed movies for kids. So that's really cool. That almost catches us up. We've only got 2 more films left. What follows is a movie that I don't think is so much underrated as almost completely ignored.
Well, the same thing happened with this that happened with Sweeney Todd. They tried to push it as a prestige picture. It has Amy Adams and Christoph Waltz giving 2 really great performances as the real-life Keens. Margaret Keene was a painter who invented a very chintzy form of, a lot of people would say, bad art. Although,
it's in the eye of the beholder, but
it's debatable. The big eyes, the big eye paintings, those really sad kids with the big eyes. That was sort of this big chintzy movement in the 1960s, and as it turns out, it was successful because she married a man named Walter Keane, who was really good at selling stuff and really great at lying.
He managed to convince her not only to marry him, but also to let him claim that they're his paintings because they'll be easier to sell that way because he's a male painter. And then he just proceeded to literally shut her away,
in a room, literally lock her in an attic,
just churning out the paintings, taking all the credit, and the relationship became increasingly horrific and abusive. And she finally escaped, and she finally declared credit. She wanted credit for her work. And there's a great line from Jason Schwartzman, who plays an art dealer, when she claims like she wants credit for the work and he's reading it in the newspaper. It's like, who would want credit?
He wanders past a storefront and they're selling like knockoff Keens, and he's just sort of staring, and he sniffs. He's like, oh, good God, it's a movement.
But they ended up in like this incredible court case. Which is even weirder in real life than what we see in the movie. Like
Wayne Newton testifying in the court case.
Wayne Newton.
Why is that not in the movie?
Why is that a thing? And because it's so weird and distracting. And it ended up with them. This is all true. This isn't a spoiler. You can look this up on Wikipedia or whatever. But it ended up basically the judge said, "Look, fuck it, both of you paint it.
Yeah,
just paint one right now
in the courtroom.
Take your time." And then Margaret Keane painted a beautiful big ice painting, and her ex-husband was just like, the inspiration isn't coming, so she got credit.
Oh, then he says, "Ow, my arm! I can't paint today."
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, and you know what? And it's a wonderful story, not just because Margaret Keane came out on top, and it was this weird story of how this chintzy art took over the art world and really turned art into commerce. That's part of this movie, but it's also a beautiful feminist parable about how women were pushed aside, in this case quite literally, in favor of charming men who felt they could do the job better, even though they had no discernible talent.
Yeah, and honestly, even the corporatization, this feels like a really personal movie to Tim Burton, and I think part of it is because he can identify with what happened.
How his art became corporatized.
Very sincere form of artistic expression, and you'll notice that many of Tim Burton's characters, when he draws, have very big eyes, a very personal form of artistic expression becomes popular, becomes commercialized, becomes chintz.
Yeah, and you can see the Keens as the two halves of Tim Burton. There was the part of him that was like really sort of eager to sell it and was happy to be part of this commercial machine because he worked with big studios all the time. He worked for Disney, he worked for Warner Brothers. He wasn't like some savage indie director who really wanted to go out onto the edges.
Like he wanted to make big movies.
Yeah, and he did. He made some of the biggest of all time. Batman, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Whereas the other person was just interested in making their own sort of quirky form of art that is debatably great.
It's just,
a lot of critics don't respond to Tim Burton. They think he's a little too childish, a little too weird, a little too action figure-y.
And you can say the same about Margaret Keane's paintings as well. And I think he connects with that. I think he connects with that very deeply. I also want to say, Amy Adams is one of the most respected actresses of her generation, and with good cause.
She's quite good.
She's brilliant. Find me a bad Amy Adams performance, and I will say you are lying.
She's even good in Catch Me If You Can.
She is. She gives what might be her best performance in this movie, and it's a really easy performance to overlook because it's not an Oscar bait performance.
Well, it's really underplayed.
It has to be because he has to play a character who gets dominated by an abusive man. And as a result, she spends most of the movie
just huddling in fear.
Kind of wilting. And it's a tough role to play for an actor who has so much strength and charisma and range. And I mean, she's Lois Lane, for fuck's sake. And listen, I think she's the best Lois Lane. I love her.
She's the only Lois Lane I think that's a good reporter.
Right? She's great. I love her. I love her in everything. She's fantastic. But here, this is actually kind of outside her usual wheelhouse, and she really stretches. And she gives an incredible performance in a really incredible movie that people really just overlooked, and it's a shame. I think this is ultimately going to go down as one of Tim Burton's best movies, but we just haven't taken the time to rediscover it yet. We should. If you missed it, or
there's a lot. There was more going on than a lot of critics initially gave it credit for. A lot of people didn't even bother to see it just because again it was number 8 on the list of Oscar stuff.
I put this in Tim Burton's like top 5 movies. Like I really do love this movie.
That's fair.
And then most recently, he's got Dumbo coming up later, I think this year, and we'll review that. But his most recent film, other than that, is his attempt to make a young adult movie, a YA film in the vein of Hunger Games or Beautiful Creatures, Harry Potter. He made Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which feels up his alley. That is a story about a home for very peculiar children.
The book was clearly inspired by Tim Burton, so they're just sort of tearing around and giving it back to him. And I feel like he's lost with this sort of material. He has never worked well with mythology, the way that the way that word is used in modern discourse.
That level of like weird depth that like because
a lot of people use
parables. He likes big stories, big images, big emotions. And
a lot of people use the word world building in criticism these days.
He gives no fucks. And like you look at something like really complicated, like what they attempted to do with Alice in Wonderland, with like no, it's Underland, and actually there's all this war going on and blah 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 blah. And you can tell Tim Burton doesn't care. He's just telling everyone to talk as fast as possible so we can get to the next scene. And when this movie falters, it's when it tries to be a proper
like really
movie.
myth heavy, and
when it has a good moment, like the moments between Asa Butterfield and his grandfather, played by Terrence Stamp, or when he's like in the home for peculiar children and he's like kind of falling in love with this girl who like
can float
and like sucks out all the water from like an or like she blows a huge air bubble.
She can blow air bubbles and they go underwater.
They're these weirdly very unique, I think, romanticized fantasy scenes that are as good as anything he's ever done visually, but they're stuck
in a vacuum.
In a vacuum, exactly. They're stuck in a movie that isn't particularly good. And it's a story of a young boy, much like Big Fish. His grandfather told him a bunch of crazy stories about monsters. And what he came to realize is that, it's all a parable for what he went through as a refugee in World War II. Okay, well, he lied to me, but I'll let it go. And then grandfather's like killed by those monsters. And he goes off to find the actual like refugee kids. who it turns out all have weird powers.
Like X-Men powers,
one of them is made of bees. One of them burns things to touch. One of them can make Frankenstein creations out of dead body parts. Never mind where they get them. Like one of them can't help but float, so they're always chained to something. Or have heavy shoes.
It's his least substantial film.
Yeah.
Because I don't sense any kind of idea in the material. You had an interesting observation when it came out that I kind of missed, how it is about these sort of refugee children, and you could see it as a parable for like actual Polish refugees from World War II.
I think it's
specifically,
I think it's very distinctively that, but I ultimately think it doesn't have much more to say other than that.
Than those were, again, this is YA fiction. YA fiction is reliant on myth, and myth is always the least interesting part. You set up the world in your head as an author, but you have to have a story to set in that world.
Yeah, like Harry Potter, the books were actually very good about that because they only revealed like all these details about the world
as you went along.
When it was relevant. Like the first Harry Potter book doesn't actually get into very much because it's not about that. It's just about this kid's first year at school. Like that's it. Like everything only comes up when it is necessary for the story. But once you backtrack, you realize nothing contradicted it. That's good world building.
Yeah.
You know?
And world building should not be your concern. It should be something that happens after the fact. And do you remember the scene in Wiener Dog, the Todd Solondz movie, where Danny DeVito plays this really put upon screenwriting professor who hates his life because it's a Todd Solondz movie?
That's the best part of that movie.
And it opens with like this like 18 or 19-year-old kid is like, I have this idea for a movie. And we slowly pan across the room and we just see the misery in Danny DeVito's face. He's pitching this idea. It's about this guy and he's got like this, like he can shoot stuff out of his hands and he can touch things and kill them, and he wears this really cool outfit and he's got a cool hairdo. Is that a good movie? And Danny DeVito just sort of like, that's not a movie.
What was his philosophy in that movie?
It's what if, then what? Yeah.
And that's honestly...
That's actually great screenwriting advice.
That's the simplest, most effective writing advice you're ever going to get. Just ask what if, and then see what would naturally happen afterwards. My God.
I see a lot of YA fiction as that kid. Yeah. Like, I have an idea for a world or a superpower, an outfit or a scenario, and they build from there. And you can tell when they're trying to make the world first and not tell a story or like to send a message to anybody.
YA fiction hit a zenith, and it's still popular and it still gets read, and that's fine. But like in Hollywood, it hit a zenith for over like the last 10 years, like after Harry Potter, and it's one of those things where it's easy to fake it.
Yeah,
you can
make Cirque du Freak.
Yeah, you can make the tropes. You can throw in, you can quantify what makes a hit movie, and then put it all together and not have a hit movie. Now, the tragedy is, in all of that glut, there were a couple that were really good that did not become hit movies.
The second Percy Jackson film is terrific.
The Percy Jackson movies are really fun. Beautiful Creatures, I will go to bat for that movie. I love that. The chemistry in that movie, like that's the only like YA movie where the romance
actually feels like a romance.
I totally buy it, and I want them to get together. It was Alden Ehrenreich's like magnum opus before Hail Caesar came out. It was great. So I don't dislike the genre. I used to be snooty about it, and I regret being snooty about it. It's just any other genre. Well,
it was just overplayed, and when you see it every other month, it becomes old, and you become bored of it. It's difficult to see them as individual works.
My point is, there are things that connect about the YA genre, and the YA genre really keys into, at its best, adolescent sort of self-interest. You see yourself as a hero, an unsung hero, a rogue, a rebel. And honestly, like nowadays,
the special child of the universe.
And we're looking at kind of like the impact of telling an entire generation, maybe 2 generations of kids, that they're all idealistic heroes who will eventually have to take down an evil generation of adults. And I'm looking at the world of politics right now, and I'm just like, thank you, YA fiction. Thank you. You did a service. So well done. At their best, you get something that really connects. Something like The Hunger Games, where the premise is relatively simple, but once you ask what if, the then what is actually pretty interesting, and you get to create a whole world from there. Then you get something like Divergent, where the whole metaphor collapses immediately. It's really stupid. Here,
those Divergent movies are terrible.
Here, the connection from Miss Peregrine to an adolescent experience is negligible. There's like nothing. There's nothing like relatable about the adolescent experience in it. So you find it in the little moments.
It's supposed to be about outsiders, but Tim Burton doesn't. He's not playing that anymore, at least not in this one.
The protagonist is not an outsider. The protagonist is a really normal kid who meets the outsiders. It should be about those kids, at least for a Tim Burton movie to really pop. And yeah, it just ultimately the metaphor is refugees. Now that's a great story, and we can totally tell that about how refugees might appear on the outside to people who are welcoming them in as different, but actually have incredible things to offer that you might never expect. And there are people out there who want to exploit and even kill them for being outsiders. That's super duper relevant, but maybe it was too early. Or maybe they just couldn't find the nugget of connective tissue to an individual experience, because that is pretty academic, and the movie itself plays like some good bits wrapped around a not good story. And that's the career of Tim Burton.
Thanks for coming on this journey with us.
Yeah. I don't know if this is the vibe of our podcast. It's an experiment. So let us know. Do you think that, sort of the franchise thing is where we live? Would you want to see more of this? I know there are other podcasts, even on the SK Plus network, that do kind of like overviews like this, and we don't want to step on any toes. But we had requests. We thought we'd try it out. Let us know what you thought. You can leave a comment on the SK Plus YouTube page. We read those. You can also email us, criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. We also have a Twitter @CriticAcclaim.
And we have individual Twitters as usual.
This is an over 2.5 hour episode of the podcast. So we said last week that we would either answer a bunch of letters this week or we would do a letters episode. We'll do a letters episode. We'll do one in about a week or so. So if you want to send us in any letters, again, criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. We'll answer a whole bunch. We'll do 2 or 3 hours of letters if we have the material. So send in your stuff. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. Next week, we will be back with reviews of the YA fantasy, The Darkest Minds.
So we're in early August now, and it's a dark time of year.
We're doing Disney's Christopher Robin, which looks creepy.
What hath you wrought, Tim Burton?
And if I can get to it in time, The Spy Who Dumped Me, which actually looks pretty funny. We will also be having our new critically acclaimed poll. That is actually already up. This episode's a bit late just because Witney was out of town and we had scheduling issues. So that might already be a foregone conclusion. But if you want to go to the Schmoville Facebook page, every Sunday we do have a poll. You get to pick either the next franchise that we do next month. The selection was all the Yojimbo movies, which is pretty cool, actually. I'm stoked about that. And then next week we're going to be doing a Rob Schneider movie, and the options are...
See, I wanted us to choose the worst, but you steered me right or wrong, depending on how you want to look at it.
I insisted that we add the Benchwarmers on there just because I don't want to talk about the hot chick.
No, you don't want to talk about Deuce Bigelow, European Gigolo?
That's a franchise. All right. So we have The Animal, in which Rob Schneider is an animal. We have
he gets animal organs and begins acting like an animal.
There's The Benchwarmers, in which David Spade, and John Hader basically formed their own Little League team in which they play because they were always benchwarmers. Okay. Then we have Knockoff.
It's a Choi Hark film.
Choi Hark is like the Spielberg of China. He came to America and all he could do were like really low grade Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. Knockoff stars Rob Schneider as a CIA agent who recruits a fashion designer played by Jean-Claude Van Damme to help him fight the Russian mafia in Hong Kong.
On the Russian mafia's big plan, where the title comes from, Knockoff designer jeans.
That's me applauding. That's pretty special. I still have never seen this movie. I really want to from that premise alone. That's incredible.
For many years, I thought Choi Hark sucked. It's like
because he only made
bad movies here, and that was my only experience.
Did you watch some of his other movies?
Yeah, I have now.
They're pretty amazing. Yeah, right? He's a great filmmaker. Ringo Lam is another one. He made a lot of great movies in Hong Kong. Came here, made a bunch of bad Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. It's a real tragedy.
America, where Kung Fu comes to die.
John Woo did Hard Target as his first American movie, and that was a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, but it was one of the better Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. I think
still not a great film.
I think the theory was, if you're coming to America and you're an action filmmaker, you start with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and then you get Broken Arrow 2 or something.
Broken Arrow 2.
Anyway, that's
Broken Arrow.
That's what's going on with Critically Acclaimed. Don't forget, you can always check us out on our other podcast, Cancel Too Soon, which is available as a separate podcast. It's not on the SK Plus network or the Schmoes Know network.
But if you become a patron on the $10 level or up, you can assign the criticallyacclaimed.net website an article.
Yeah, we will write an article.
One for each of us.
Yeah, you tell us what to write. You're basically our editor for 2 articles, one for Witney and one for me. We have a lot of those. We're going to be getting through it for a bit, but it's really interesting to see what people want us to write. So that's really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to really hunkering down and pumping out a few new ones. So we got that going on. We have Cancel Too Soon. Bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah. We're everywhere. So thanks for your patience. I'm sorry that this episode was late. I'm sorry it was so long. But thank you for listening. Do come back next week.
Yeah. Again, I'm on Twitter, William Bibbiani. He's at Witney Seibold. And never forget, everyone's a critic.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?